Well, hello everyone. Welcome. Good morning from Brisbane in Australia, and very, very excited to see you here for On the Shadows of the Ideas, the Umbris Idearum. Now, there's a couple of opening things we have to do in order to talk about how we're going to go through this book, but as you are signing in and so forth, make sure to hit that thumbs up and let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking in the chat. I already see a bunch of people coming on, and hello, welcome. And one thing that we will be able to do as we go through this is from time to time have a look at our chat and see who's around and so forth, and have a good old time that way. I think I can even get a better view this way. Whoa, look at the magic. All right, so On the Shadows of the Ideas by Giordano Bruno. Thanks everyone for joining us, and if you're joining the live stream as a replay, also hit the thumbs up, get involved in the discussion. As David says, let's get these wheels spinning. Alejandro is here from Costa Rica. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Luciano, Rob is here. Excellent to see you, Rob, and excellent to see David, Christian, Austin, Yofer, Christopher, everyone. All right. So, On the Shadows of the Ideas. Now, we got to spend some time on the title, but first of all, I want to say thank you to Miskatonic Books and to John Michael Greer for allowing me to do this. Now, I don't know if you're aware of just what a tremendous honor this is, and a pleasure to be able to use their good works, their hard works. So please make sure that you reach out to them and say thank you, because this is a tremendous honor. So for John Michael Greer, echosophia.net is a really interesting blog. Make sure that you check it out. You're reading it, and Miskatonic Books is at miskatonicbooks.com. Get that a little bit more on the screen there. And really, really wonderful. Not only because we're going to be able to look at it on the screen, but it's just wonderful that they did this, took the initiative. And I don't know if people are aware of just how much hard work it is to put books together, but it's a lot of work. And especially if you're going to do multiple editions, hardcover and so forth, getting it all set up through the internet world and so forth. So please share their thanks. There's a link in the description of this video to go and get On the Shadows of the Ideas on Amazon, and please do so. And also on Echo Sophia, you'll see that John Michael Greer has links to his books in ways that support local bookstores and so forth, which is very, very recommended. Now, I have a few other thank yous before we get started, because in terms of doing this, I don't think there is any best way to read such a book, and I don't think that we should read it in isolation. So if this series proves useful and interesting to you, and I know that it's useful and interesting to you because you here live or on the replay are making it loud and clear to me that it's useful, Scott Gosnell has also suggested and offered that we could get a PDF up on the screen on the composition of images, which I think is wonderful and beautiful. And so you should also be aware of some things that Scott has coming up, such as hardcover editions of some of his books, and that's at bottlerocketscience.blogspot.com. And, there's a huge thank you to be made for Scott, because he put out some of these translations for things that just are really not available in any other way. And so that has helped me tremendously in what I'm trying to learn from ye old Giordano Bruno. And so that's going to be wonderful. But please do let me know if you're benefiting from this, enjoying this, and so forth. Because so often in the world of the internet, we have crickets. And then that says, less. But if we're telling the robots and the meat tubes that they, other meat tubes enjoy this stuff, then you will get more of it. So make sure to be engaged if you want more of it. Of course, I have to do a good job and actually perform this with some decency, which we'll see. I am not a professional audiobook narrator, and this is not necessarily the path to this isn't necessarily the kind of book that would be narrated in an audio sense, but I think it could be. Anyway, one last thank you before we rock and roll to Martin Fox. He has done some incredible things, including getting this out, the Hermetic Art of Memory. So that's another resource. And his work and his comments and his actual use of Bruno's memory wheels are very educational, enlightening, elucidating, and tremendously valuable. So if you don't know his work, check it out. And do read The Hermetic Art of Memory. It'll help you understand all of this a lot better. One more announcement before we really start to rock and roll. I am totally blown away by Braden Adams' project. I believe it's the 28th of August. He will be doing a live stream where he is going to memorize 70 decks of cards to help raise funding for Alzheimer's research, but also the care of people who, go out to care for others and give them resources and additional help, which is really, really profound. So if you go to magneticmarymethod.com/BC alts, ALZ, BC, ALZ, you will see his current goal for the amount of donations that he's generated so far. And you can pledge as well. I've done some pledging, and there's an interview coming out with him hopefully in a couple of days where you can hear more about how exactly he's setting things up to memorize 70 decks of cards, which is a lot of playing cards. And we had a great discussion. So please, rather than live chats today, super chats or anything like that, I always appreciate that, of course. And thank you to 12 Misers for becoming a member of the channel. I really, really appreciate that. But if you were thinking of doing super chats, send them on over to Braden's project. It's raising funds in a way that I think is really, really profound and important. And it makes meaning out of what memory competitors do in a way that few memory competitors put together. There have been other examples. It's just very inspiring when there is meaning put to this. And so cards are cards, but when the actual accomplishment leads to the activity of helping improve something like a disease like Alzheimer's and dementia, that is very, very commendable indeed. So, with all that said, the first thing that we should talk about in order to really dig into On the Shadows of the Ideas is to discuss the meaning of the title and then discuss the meaning of the subtitle, because this is where this book begins. Titles and stuff have their place. Now, I'm just going to quickly do an adjustment here. That was a little bit annoying. There we go. So, On the Shadows of the Ideas. We had some shadows in our little stream here. Comprising an art of investigating, discovering, judging, ordering, and applying, set forth for the purpose of inner writing and not for vulgar operations of memory. If I was writing this, I would have not in big old capital letters, N-O-T. Now, what does vulgar mean? It means, for example, I think if memory serves, we're going to skip to page 67 in a second here. And that would be a vulgar, mundane use. Now, vulgar and mundane and ubiquitous does not necessarily mean an insult to using the memory techniques for everyday purposes, memorizing someone's name, etc., or memorizing a number. It's not a comment on that being bad in any way, but rather there is a way to use memory techniques to educate oneself about, let's say, the value of the present moment. And so, in some sense, this book is about how you could use memory techniques to experience infinity, to experience pure emergence, pure becoming, the actual ability to be the thing that, you want. You want to be free from constraint. You want to be blissful and content. You want to be unbothered by blah, blah, blah in your mind, right? Well, how do you do this? Well, you have an art of investigating and you have an art of discovering and judging and ordering and applying what it is that appears in your consciousness so that you might actually have the experience of being what all people seek, which is essentially to be exactly what you are, without pain, without suffering, and so forth. So Stefos is saying here that Bruno's worldview was a spiritual one, not a materialistic one. I don't know that that's the case. In fact, I think the whole point here is to dissolve the very notion that there is a difference between spiritual and material. It is irrelevant that material things appear in our consciousness. What is relevant is, are we able to allow what is to be what is without thinking that our little 3-pound brain somehow has something to say about it? Because, when we do have something to say about it and then we go, damn, why did I say that? That was stupid. That creates pain. And who wants pain? Nobody. No, nobody, right? But we give it to ourselves all the time. Why? Because we think the ideas are real, but the ideas are actually shadows, right? They are pale reflections of what is actually true. And what could truth mean? Well, it can't mean that there's a division between spirit and material, as Stefos is putting forth. That's not possible. That can't be true. How can anything be divided in consciousness, right? Where would that be? Where would the division be? It can't be. So we are creating somehow this division, and that division is not real. Now, on the shadows of the ideas. So what is a shadow? What is an idea? We can go into a lot of discussions about what it means for Plato, the idea, what it means for the Neoplatonic or Plotinus and his ideas of what an idea would mean. A very short way to just get into this is say, read some Plato and read some Plotinus. But in Plato, there is a sense that the good, or the idea of the good, is like a heaven where all things are perfect. And everything on earth is a shadowy reflection. It is a copy. And because it's a copy, it is not that perfect thing. And so if you read Plato, there is a sense that you can do things that will progress you potentially in this lifetime, but usually not, to get to that perfect realm of the good. And so this is a proto-Christian sort of idea that sometime in the future, there's a heaven that you could reach. Everything here is, unfixed, changing. It's improper. It's impure. It's a shadowy reflection, right? And this is a very painful thing to be in the not perfect realm, right? But what we can do, and this is where the Neoplatonic stuff comes in, we don't have to wait. We don't have to progress. We don't have to, somehow go on a journey. No, we can be very, very connected with ultimate reality right now. Why should we wait? Because pure eminent being is happening right now. All things that we could ever be conscious of is happening now. It's appearing right now. The idea of the future is not really a shadow of some perfect idea of the future. No, it's happening right now. Where else would it happen? The future is an image that's happening right now, insofar as one is focusing on that. So to be, reflecting on the shadows of the ideas would be to dissolve that there is even such a thing as an idea. Rather, there is just what is happening now. So how are we going to dissolve the illusions? How are we not going to say, like Stefos says, that Bruno's worldview was a spiritual one, not a materialistic one? How are we going to get beyond that, right? This is the Nietzschean project, to go beyond the binary, beyond good and evil. Actually, Nietzsche makes a joke about Bruno, and he's just kind of like, yeah, I don't think Bruno got it yet. Which I think that we don't know what Nietzsche, or I don't know what Nietzsche actually read of Bruno, but Nietzsche's a hard cat to follow sometimes. He's sometimes making jokes and you don't know if you actually are in on the joke or not. But in any case, I think that he probably hadn't read the court documents, because if you really want to understand Bruno, you can't just take the books. You also have to read the documents of the trials, and then you will see, really, I think, the culmination of his philosophy and the dissolution of the basic separation, the idea that somehow your brain is separate from the universe rather than just being in a becoming, a pure becoming, an emergence together as one. So since we're lost, since we're somehow not able to experience this, how can we? Well, we comprise ourselves an art of investigating, self-inquiry, to be able to ask and to order and to judge and to apply and set forth our inner writing that helps remind us of what we need to know as this strange 3-pound brain throws up all kinds of objections and strange things in the world. And we need an art of memory to do that. So the wheels here, which are very, very beautiful, they basically are divided into intentions and conceptions. Now, in terms of doing this reading, I decided that we're going to come back to those. And there is no perfect way to do this. So, forgive me if I have made a bad choice here, but I want to go to the art of memory first. Then if there's enough interest, you are all showing enough interest. I see that you have donated to Braden's Alzheimer's cause, etc. Then we can get into what those conceptions and intentions are. But the idea is that there are material concerns and there are spiritual concerns. And so what is the spiritual response to the material concerns? To dissolve the idea that you were ever divided from them in the first place. Well, on your outer wheel, for example, you might have all of the concerns that may come up from the material world, or as many as you have space for on your wheel. And then on one wheel down, you would have all of the potential spiritual responses to the material concerns that may present themselves to you, so that by turning the wheel when a material concern comes up and then matching it with the best possible spiritual response, you have what Ezra Pound might have called the luminous detail emerging, right? Which would allow you to be able to have a solution. A solution to do what? Well, to dissolve your feeling of separation, to get rid of your ego. For the Zen master, this would be to wake up, without being slapped necessarily. You just turn the wheels. Now, do you have to turn the wheels to do this? I don't necessarily think so. There are other approaches. Advaita Vedanta has approaches, etc. And you can look into those things, for example, in my book, The Victorious Mind. But this is very doable and very, very interesting. But as I say, I decided to go across the intentions and the conceptions. But you should know that that is the goal here. One of the reasons why students struggle with this book so much is that they don't quite understand all of the opening material. So the intentions and the conceptions, and then how to move the wheels, and essentially how to use the images that Bruno is giving in order to do this dissolution of the feeling of separation from the truth of what is. So you'll want to consider for yourself these opening notes as you read it, and we will go to the art of memory and come back to those if there's enough interest. And as I say, Scott has been kind enough to send me the PDF version of On the Composition of Images, and if there's enough interest, we will go into that, because I think if there were a syllabus to try, it would be start with the actual art of memory, which we'll get into reading now, then go through the conceptions and the intentions, then, maybe let me take that back. We'll go through the art of memory, then we would go through the composition of images, then we would go back to the conceptions and the intentions in order to do what is sometimes called contraction, so that you're actually able to memorize what you want on those wheels for your material and your spiritual concerns, and then spin them or turn them in order to contract, which is essentially to be one with the way things are as they are. All right. So with all that said, let us proceed to The Art of Memory of Giordano Bruno. And as I read, I will stop to comment on certain things. And thank you again for being here. Let's go. We consider this art to belong to the shadows of the ideas, since it rouses the sluggish nature that already exists, or it directs and guides the wayward and exorbitant, or it strengthens and sustains the weak and weary, or it corrects the erring, or it follows the perfect and emulates the industrious. Beautiful. It is indeed the sort of thing that ought to be put in the category of the architecture of discourse, and it follows a certain habit of reasoning in the mind, which proceeds from the life principle of the world to the life principle of each individual thing that comes forth, and of all individual things together. Nothing depends on that power as though hanging from a branch, nor by some peculiar faculty emerging from it. Rather, all share the same trunk, since the same essence of the universal soul indwells all. I think that the same principle applies here. If the art consisted in the power of memory, how would it issue from the intellect? And if it consisted in the power of intellect, how would it proceed out of memory, sensation, and desire? Rather, through one and the same thing, we are regulated and directed toward what is to be understood, discussed, memorized, imagined, desired, and whatever we wish to be perceived. But it is not enough to begin by asking what carries the mind generally to each and all of its functions. It is necessary also to ask by what means the mind acquires an art. By what art does the mind acquire an art? Is it not proper to call art what nature, the mother of skill, strives to master through frequent repetitions? Now notice these are questions. By what art does the mind acquire an art? This is a very, very important idea to think through. Because when you're struggling to learn memory techniques, you might wonder, why is this so difficult? And it may be that you don't yet have the powers of analysis. You don't yet have the powers of self-discipline needed to actually sit and read a book and chart out a map. You may not even yet have the powers to follow the map that a teacher gives you, because you still need to go and cultivate other things. And in many, many traditions, there is the idea of qualification. And there is the idea that you simply can't even hear the truth, even though it's put in front of you, because the ground hasn't been put there. In other words, you don't yet have the art to acquire the art. And so it is really interesting. Now, this point of, is it not proper to call art what nature, the mother of skill, strives to master through frequent repetitions? This is kind of an interesting question, because here, in memory, we are often thinking about reducing repetition. But when we are using tools like this, it is rather the point to be repeating, upon demand, the wisdom that helps us escape the suffering that comes from the illusion of separation, right? So this is kind of, in my mind, asking us to, drop some of the vulgar use of memory techniques and place it in the more enlightened realm. Enlightenment meaning something more like being able to experience elucidation on demand, so to speak, and to be satisfied with things being the way that they are. Would it not be proper to say that before all other arts there exists one art that we may call organic, as it works through many organons, an art that is not itself an organon, but functions through organons? Is it not proper to call something an art when it makes the instruments of art? What would it be if not an art? Since the organon that creates other organons takes precedence over them, expound to me the reason why another art ought to precede this art. Wherein does an organic art excel that agents are subject to it? In all doubts proceeding from the nature of that which comes before it. Those, in a certain sense, have been made susceptible to diminution in the innermost recesses of the primary organon. While common philosophers are apt to name the essence from the external form of things, we demur, as it is customary to put reasoning methods in the category of extrinsic form, as though art is not to be found in the innermost recesses of matter. But this is far from our intention and should not be interpreted as such. So I'm not entirely sure I'm following the plot here, but what I think he's saying, and I think he's referring to an age-old debate that is largely a waste of time. And that is the debate of, are memory techniques artificial or are they natural? And again, we want to push beyond the division. We don't want to get caught up in this, well, is it invented or is it discovered and all this kind of stuff. What does it matter if consciousness is the now? If the now is the only thing that we actually ever have, how, you can call all the way back to Adam and be like, hey, where did the alphabet come from? And does the answer matter? No, the alphabet is here, right? And so we can just cut to the chase and say, here we have this. It doesn't matter whether it's invented or synthetic or whatnot. Things appear in consciousness, and you could think about some of the other ways that people get hot and bothered about human creations and whether or not somehow technology is non-organic or whatnot. It's the production of reality. So the case is rather, as it appears to the better philosophers, of that which is first, nothing else can be said. As the natural faculties are born together with reason, with the seeds of primal principles, the potentials within which are drawn by extrinsic objects as though by a lure, and by the intellectual agents as though by the sun's light, and by the eternal ideas as though they received the influences of the stars flowing together through a medium, as it is ordained by the best and highest of all, which fecundates all in action, so that each proceeds to its proper end by means of its own powers. It is manifest from this that when we wish to call this art the natural font of all arts, we do so rashly. So again, it's more of this, why are we trying to come up with some origin to things when the notion of the origin is in us? So, it is with a considered intention, therefore, that we can say that in some things art exceeds nature, and in others it is surpassed by her. The former is less possible with the more remote acts of nature, but may be said with more reason of those things nearer to us that we are able to examine. A thing that can perpetuate the substantial form of something in the same species, which cannot perpetuate it in the same number, for in this art the faculties are not extended. Thus, the extrinsic form and figure is the revealer of the great key. By art, it is committed to hard stone or diamond. Likewise, the conditions, acts, and name of memory and the objects of understanding that are to be perpetuated are committed, which nature would not have been able to retain, since the stomach of changeable matter promptly digests all things. So notice this, the art is committed to hard stone or diamond. These are interesting metaphors. Obviously, they're a little bit different than the wax tablet metaphor, because a wax tablet is essentially a thing that somebody makes, and then you scratch into it, or you otherwise impress something into its surface. But here he's using a hard stone or diamond metaphor, which is quite interesting when you think about the astronomical is that the word? Astronomical writings and so forth, and the notion of infinite planets and many suns and so forth. Because in some sense, when you're using memory techniques, you really are creating other planets. And so it's not so much just that it's committed to hard stone that has pressures that can lead to diamond hard structures, but rather imagine you take a memory palace and you really start to nurture it and so forth, And, it's like a planet. And let's say you have now on your planet memory palace, you build a street. You could actually just start with countries or continents, and then inside of that, countries, and inside of that, cities, and inside of that, neighborhoods, and inside of that, you can have streets, and inside of that, you can have individual houses, and inside of those houses, you can have individual rooms, and inside of those rooms, you could have bookshelves, etc. Now, this hardness and this concreteness, if you were to spin that planet, it could eventually spin so fast that it becomes the sun, and then it has other planets that, orbit around it and so forth. So this is a very, very interesting passage and metaphor of the substance of what a memory is. An individual memory can be so hard that it eventually becomes its own solar system of knowledge. I think that this is really a beautiful thing. All right. So, whence, I ask, come the faculties of this art? Beyond a doubt from the source whence genius springs. Next, the genius of what? Of man, and man with all his faculties, whence comes he? Surely he is born of nature. So, if one must have this idea, then memory techniques are natural. If you would contemplate the thing from the beginning, therefore, and wish to dig up this tree by the roots in order to transplant it, it is inclined by nature to cultivation and recognition. You will surely excel in it who, shouting and clamoring in the beginning, direct your soul toward the fearful things that we illuminate. Nature is what confines the soul in the body. Nature furnishes fitting instruments to the soul, and it is from this that the Pythagoreans and the wisest of the magicians claim to perceive the shape of life and soul in the form of the body. Nature herself submits to you in all things, unless you turn away from her. Universal nature is not composed in such a way as to fail in her duty to us, for Jupiter reigns upon all shoots and over all plants benign. Apollo rises, still not all things are endowed equally with life by the things above them, though all things equally turn toward the higher, so that it may be clearly seen in us by what our own selves is separated from that communion. So, when we talk about the problem of separation, this is very interesting. I don't know if this is a reference to as below, so above, and all that sort of stuff, but one of the things to really consider here is that, we can see this separation. We can see how that we are separated. It's incredible, and we can dissolve that separation. Rob says in the chat, let me see here. I have read that Tesla built a world in his own mind with all the characters and have relationships. I tried it and was attracted to it. Great additional idea to apply to memory. Yes, it's brilliant, and that's essentially what we are doing. We're building our characters, our associations, our memory palaces, and the memory palace is more like a theater stage than it is a movie. Some people think of the memory techniques as, or memory itself as a kind of recorder that you can play things back as if they are movies. But it's really more like a stage theater, and you have your characters and you put them all over the stage, and you're like the stage director, and you say, okay, so I wanted to remember the number 67. What was my character there? And you get your character, and you get them to replay whatever thing you did with them in order to help you remember that. So it's like a paracosm of characters. Very, very beautiful. Great point, Rob. Thank you for that. Thus, nature stands above everything possible, whether before natural things or in natural things or through natural things. You should therefore understand that every action begins with nature, and you should not forget to guide nature by itself. You may distinguish this however you like from the positive agent in the vulgar natural philosophy. I do not teach this. Still, I would admit under oath that just as that is distinguished, so the organ that operates is distinguished from that which is operated on, as the medium from the source, and the arm from that which it shakes. You should therefore understand that we are not following the vulgar philosophy in which the name of nature is applied to matter and form, but rather that we recognize the intrinsic principle of nature, whether it be common to all, or supposed in this case, or has been contracted to it. Thus, we gladly listen to all the speeches of idiots when they compare the nature of that person with the nature of this one, not because it is possible to apprehend nature according to universal logic or according to similitudes, but rather according to the physical, which sometimes is in all things, and at other times is contracted to individual things. Thus, things that are past and absent can represent things that are present and visible. Thence we can perceive sensible things by sculptures and pictures. In the same way, transient words brought forth in empty air may be made enduring by writing. In this way, conceptions that are expressed, just like those that are silent, become communicable and are transmitted to all places and times. What commonly is called either fate or necessity or the good or demogorgon or the anima mundi or nature is communicated to the things below it, drawing them from imperfection to perfection. It proceeds in motion and time, being the beginning of these in the whole and in each thing. The arts are said to progress in the same manner, as though by a guiding hand. Thus, and this points toward the proposition we have in mind, it is said that the ancients once wrote with knives on tree bark. In a succeeding age, they wrote with a stylus on stones they dug from the ground. This was followed by papyrus written upon with ink from squids. Then came parchment with ink darkened artificially, and thereafter paper and water-based inks were brought into use and proved to be far more apt for writing. The art of writing thus progressed from knives to styluses, from styluses to sponges, from sponges to reeds, from reeds to pens, and from pens, finally, to cast type. We could add to computer type, digital ink, right? And maybe beyond, because soon they may be opening up our brains and forcing us to have neural ink, which would not be digital ink, but something else, electro ink. In the same manner as may be seen in the development of writing, we judge internal writing to have proceeded from the beginning of humane studies, whether it had its origin with Simonides of Melos, or from some other, which put places and images in place of paper and letters, and imaginative and cogitative acts in place of the scribe and his reed pen. Thus they learned to inscribe the species of the things that were to be memorized in an internal book. With what diligence and what and how much we have been able to add, and how much we have been able to draw together from these monuments, you may be the judge. Those that we have made have all been added as a result of, key word, my friends, practice. This is beautiful. Now, in case you're not following the plot with Simonides here, he's referring to the idea that we have all of these forms of writing, and then comes a time in the Greek tradition where we can write not on paper, but in our minds, using things like the memory palace technique, right? So this is where he's going, is there's a kind of writing that is on the external world, but there's a kind of writing that is inside. Now, I don't know that we necessarily have to divide the inside from the outside, and there's many reasons to dissolve them. But nonetheless, there's a sort of sense here that the quality of your external literacy, your worldly literacy, your ability to be literate in a material sense, is directly linked to your ability to be literate inside of your own mind. So, read books and write. Learn to write. Learn the skills of rhetoric, the skills of persuasion through writing and so forth, and speaking. Now, in the book, The Great Key, before we go here, the note is interesting here, Bruno's unpublished book in which he expounds his system in its entirety. Now, I don't know what we do know or don't know about The Great Key, Clavis Magnus, or is Clavis Magna, but I think that this is one of the places where we can pause upon Bruno being a great marketer. He's sort of, constantly referring to this great key that is yet to come, right? And I just think it's so cool that he drops this all the time, as if each book were a kind of sales letter for the next book. Will the next one have the great key, or will it be the great key? So, in the book, The Great Key, you will find 12 subjects presented: species, forms, simulacra, images, apparitions, examples, traces, indices, signs, notes, characters, and sigils. Some of these refer to things perceptible by the eyes, or in figurative language, things created by nature rather than art. These include external form, image, or example, which by painting or some other figurative art that emulates its mother describes many things and are described by them. Some are referred to the internal sense, in which they are magnified, distributed, and multiplied in measure, duration, and number, so that, having been drawn together into phantasms, they offer themselves to that faculty. So this is material that is very richly drawn out on the composition of images. So again, if you are enjoying this and you would like to see a session on that, make sure that we know loud and clear. If you're just joining us and you haven't hit that thumbs up yet, bam, on the thumbs up. And this is really, really great stuff that is being set up here, because there are tools that you can use in your memory work that are much more material, hands-on, that relate to things that you already know. And then there are things that are more internal, conceptual. And that's what he's drawing out here. Some are, so there are some that turn one way and another on the same point of similitude. For example, they make an example using a form of the same genus and substance of the same species. Some lack their own proper substance, so that it is perfectly clear in what way the sophist lies about reality, as art imitates nature universally. Some indeed are assigned to art in such a way that they are seen to be approved by nature. These are signs, notes, characters, and sigils, in which there is so much power that they may be seen to act beyond nature, above nature, and if circumstances require it, against nature. Now, just to help at least clarify for myself, what we're talking about here in terms of similitude is there are some things that really, make a point out of being as close in correspondence. And so if you're making images, associations in your memory palaces, then, you can think about things like similitude, and you can think of categories like genus and substance and so forth. In the magnetic memory method, this is usually under the category of concepts, the conceptual mode. Because, for example, if you're memorizing something and you're using Neo from Matrix or whatever, when I learned Neonai, which is milk in Mandarin, it's just a nice little memory hook to not just use Neo from the Matrix, but to also just say, this is in the sci-fi genre. This is the genus of this reference. So when you're making your references and you just think for a second, how categorically does my reference, have similitude or verisimilitude with the world, right? And just something like it's sci-fi or it's cyberpunk or whatever it is gives you an extra little hook. Because when you're thinking back, what was that word for milk? And you're like, oh yeah, I had whatever in there. And then, boom. It just helps it so much to think in these ways. All right. So these latter may be used whenever figures and images are unable to do what is required. Exactly. So, your associations don't always do what you require them to do. So by having these additional ways of applying the techniques, more is more. These latter may be used whenever figures and images are unable to do what is required. That is, when what is to be memorized does not remain in the genus of things that can be imagined or figured. These lack those accidents by which habitually we knock on the doors of the senses. They lack different parts and disposition, and without these preliminaries, it is impossible to proceed to the act of making effigies. Some things are a kind that in one part occupies a middle ground. These are the things that in a certain sense refer and are referred. They are called indices. We therefore indicate not only those things that can be affected, imagined, and exemplified, such as examples, images, and effigies, but also those that express and are expressed, such as sigils, notes, and characters. Thus it is not rash to say that in this enumeration, indices fall into a middle place. So he's basically doing this introduction to things he's going to talk about later in terms of dividing your different kinds of associations so that the things are actually memorable rather than, spending a lot of time on activity. And Renee is in the memory palace. Good to see you, Renee. The species, form, simulacrum, example, and apparition of Hermes, therefore, shows us Hermes himself. So this is similitude. Notes, characters, and sigils show us the substance, essence, goodness, justice, and wisdom of Hermes. That which recalls Hermes to our minds in both ways, and those things which are said to belong to Hermes are properly called indices. These combine images and notes in one, and by them we show and indicate at the same time. This can be seen manifested in the demonstrative pronouns of Mercury and virtue alike. We say this simulacrum, this sign, that note, that similitude. Considering this, remember that this art is unable to achieve its ends except by means of things that are sensed, formed, figured, and contracted in time and place. Why this happens in all other mental techniques is expressed in the first volume of The Great Key. It is not possible, however, to communicate all things by images, since many of the things that are to be memorized can neither be imagined nor made into effigies, nor are they similar to anything that can be linked indirectly to an image or effigy. Examples are terms, uses, hypostases, mind, and other things of this genus. But instead, things that signify can be expressed by signs, and things that can be imagined by images. It is so that they are not passed over by the mind, that images are no less to be joined to signs as signs to images. Now, I think this is quite misleading, and it's an early book, and I just don't agree, whether it's not fixed and tidied up later or not. The idea that there are things that can neither be imagined nor made into effigies is just, I don't know what that would be. And it doesn't seem to gel with other things that he said. What is it that could not be imagined, right? The very idea that you are imagining something that cannot be imagined is already partly the image of the thing that you're referring to, right? So I don't know. And then in terms of the raw application of memory techniques, if that you can spread the word about it, like for example, this book, well, we can turn it into imagery just by looking at the alphabet, right? So we can look at words like The Great Key. And I can't imagine this book because it was never released, right? And yet the very, thing can be still memorized. The Great Key can be memorized, and we just imagine a big old key, and then, Clavis Magna, I believe it is the original title. We can then think, well, I can't see Clavis Magna. I don't even really understand the language that well, but I can look at CLA, and I can think about, Matthew Clark used to be one of my professors, and I can have him with a Visa card, and then for Magna, I can have, the magnetic memory method logo, or whatever, right? So now, I can easily make a combination of effigies, and I can turn Matthew into Matthew Clark into this effigy, so to speak, and he doesn't have to actually have the book even in existence in order to start to memorize some material about it. So I'm not. I feel very strongly if we continue this series, you will see that he goes back on this in other texts. Out of a defect of connection comes a certain infirmity in using this art. Out of a defect of connection comes a certain infirmity in using this art. This is the thing. He says earlier, practice. He doesn't make a big deal out of it right there. He will make a big deal out of it in other books. But you don't have a defect of connection when you practice. Rather, when you practice, you are being what you want to become, right? If you want the truth about how memory techniques work, you do memory techniques, and then you are the thing that you seek, because he talks about the brain and so forth, and I think we can talk more about the brain because we have more science to help us talk about the brain. One thing to consider is memory nested in consciousness, or is consciousness the production of memory? Now, I would argue, and I think Bruno would be the first to sign up to this agenda, is that consciousness is the production of memory. And here's why. you have a brain and all these brain parts. We can get into occipital lobes and frontal lobes and parietal lobes and all the lobes. And we can get into this, that, and the other thing, default mode networks and task positive networks, blah, 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 blah. We can get into procedural memory. We can get into episodic memory, figural memory, autobiographical memory, all that sort of stuff. These things are produced by 3-pound brains in heads, as far as we know, right? And what does all of the operations of these different levels of memory that are produced by the meat, literally meat, what does it do? Well, memory is the production in which consciousness is processed. It is the processor that also makes the experience of consciousness possible so that it might actually process it to the point that it can perceive itself, right? And so when you have a defect, it's because you're not practicing the ability to perceive itself, to be the thing that perceives itself. Because once you perceive yourself, then, you go, oh my goodness, I can memorize this stuff because I just look at the, get out of my head, learn the systems, learn how to perceive the language, and nothing that can be expressed in words is beyond the skill, because I just look at the alphabet and then I think through the categories of the associations that I have at my disposal, and then I practice using them. It's just that simple. So out of a defect of connection comes a certain infirmity in using this art, which is that in many cases, ordered species do not occur, and this does not only happen from the source that our predecessors have considered. This is because the sense of sight sometimes fails because of the excellence of the light, the obscurity of the darkness, the greatness of the multitude, the dispersal by distance, and other things of the same kind in the places in which things are accustomed to be. For this reason, just as biting dog may be hit with a stone as well as a stick, or just as a biting dog may be hit with a stone as well as a stick, those who do not understand the true source of this distinction find fault with another. So this is quite interesting. And those who know the S.J. Paris, I believe her name is, Bruno novels, they will know of a certain reference to a biting dog that may or may not have come out of this passage. But I think, he's listing here not only practical reasons why you might fail, but also practical reasons why you might fail because you do not practice. We, however, to whom it has been given to find and perfect this art, have no need for material places verified by the external senses, nor do we draw up in order a list of ordered places to be memorized, constructed purely of imagination. So this is kind of strange. Because he's got all kinds of different memory palaces and he's drawn them up and listed them, and 30 seals is just a big old list of potential memory palaces. So this is a young book. This is a guy, I think, who's a little bit high and mighty, maybe, at this time, and he's kind of saying, just use wheels. Just use imaginary memory palaces. But he's not incorrect. You can make you don't need actual material places. Yet, at the same time, the alphabet, and in 30 Seals, I believe the first of the suggested memory constructs, I would just call it a memory palace, is the field. And so there we're getting a patterning based out of the alphabet. And the notion that the alphabet is not material is problematic. And I don't know why that wouldn't have been more prominent back then, because part of the meditative act is on things like letters. I mean, he's deeply influenced by the meditation on letters. At least it's certainly the case, because it was a practice in various traditions to meditate on letters. And letters are material. First of all, they're material in the sense that they're ink on a page. In order to have ever perceived a letter, he mentioned earlier, scratching into bark, you would have had to see it materially, in the material world, so to speak. But it's also material in the sense that anything that is in your mind is in your brain, right? Because your brain is producing consciousness, and your memory is producing consciousness. So if it's not material, what is it? It's positive and negative ions flowing through synapses. It's material. It's all material. So the idea that a memory palette, like a memory wheel that is divorced, quote unquote, divorced from the material world, is just not gonna. Doesn't hold. It can't hold, because there's matter at the end of things, or at least this is the way it seems. I'm going on a little bit of a deviation here, but I think it's important to think this through, because purely imaginative things, it doesn't even cohere with his own conception of, consciousness. Everything is conscious. If it does, then you have to look more comprehensively, think about what he's saying, particularly during the trials and the dissolution of difference. So again, it's an early book, and we don't have to take it all hook, line, and sinker. Fascinating though, right? All right. We, however, to whom it has been given to find and perfect this art, have no need for material places, verified by the external senses, nor do we draw up in order a list of ordered places to be memorized, constructed purely of imagination. We presume to have succeeded in this so far, that whatever the ancients considered, taught, and ordained in this art, insofar as these are explained in those of their writings that have come into our hands, it is not necessary to our invention, which is an invention in the pregnant mode to which the great key is appropriate. Meanwhile, however, we return to the dignity of this consideration. Oh, this is so funny. Let's check in with our chat here for a second. Take a little break. All right, so Grant says, Anthony, I don't think you realize what a blessing you are to some of us. Not many would care to share their time with us as you do for free. You are a wonderful person. Thank you, Grant. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your kind words. Jonathan loves this. Stepho says, perhaps very abstract concepts like pure being. I don't think that pure being is an abstract concept at all. I think, Stepho, that people, they don't understand, or they don't reflect that the very notion of abstraction is very concrete. It's very tangible. I just don't buy into the idea of abstraction. I mean, there's obviously uses for that concept, but pure being is not an abstract concept. It's happening to you right now. The very notion of pure is appearing in you, and you are producing that concept. You are producing the experience of that concept, most apparently through the miracle of being so lucky as to have had a brain, or so cursed, because it's not entirely clear that it's a blessing, is it? All right. Fun. But yeah, I don't think that pure being is even particularly meaningful. Rather, what we should do, or what I feel should is a dangerous word, but what we might be blessed by doing, and enlightened by doing, and elucidated by doing, if we can't be enlightened, is by going, hang on a second, where would this purity be, and where would being be, right? Being is something that is done to me, not something that I do, right? And find me the evidence to the contrary, and I will be indeed very impressed. This is why you really want to read and think and consider for yourself Nietzsche's commentary on Bruno, because I think that's where he feels that he has Bruno, in a checkmate move in terms of philosophy. Whether he does or not, I don't know. It's all just fun play at the end of the day. But rather, it is something that's playing you more than you are playing it, almost certainly. Now, Grant says, I agree with the 30 seals, and it gives examples of systems you could make on your own. Use your imagination and you can. 12 Misers, thank you for being a channel member. Really appreciate that. 4 a.m. in Norway. This is powerful. I will enjoy the replay. Oh, wonderful. Thank you for being here when you could, and see you on the replay. The robo version of ourselves, assuming we're not robotic now. Alejandro says, I'm so new on this memory journey that I've never heard of these books, so this is enlightening for me. Wonderful. Thank you for being here. John K., well, thank you very much. Epic says, to add an auditory element to my stations, should I also convert the words into lyrics to my favorite song, with the songs being picked based on the first letter of the musician? Yeah, you could do that. However, experiment with it, but do you need to go to that extreme or that extent in order to add an auditory element? It depends on what you're memorizing, I guess. But I guess it depends on, to what extent you've already memorized the lyrics of these songs and so forth. But, when I'm memorizing some things, what did I memorize recently? Tesham eva anukam partem aham ajanam. Aham ajanam. I think I'm missing a word here, but then it ends tamaha. I think that was it. In any case, like Teshem, if I want to add a musical instrument to it, I can just look at TES. I can think of Tesla, try to hear the voice of Tesla, or there's a band called Tesla, and I can just think of like, what's a Tesla tune, right? So I don't need to have memorized any of their lyrics or anything like that. If I wanted that additional element, I can. But the actual image for Teshem that I used is, which means something in Sanskrit in the grammatical context of like to bring forth or to transfer over or whatever. I have Tesla driving a Tesla over a Christmas ham, right? And that has an auditory element of its own. That sort of thing. So I don't need to go to the extreme of thinking, okay, so what's a musical, lyrical thing? But by all means, that's a good question, and experiment with it and see how it goes. But the alternative would be to have your associations as such have an auditory element. And if you wanted to add music, almost anything you would memorize, your associations would have a clue alphabetically what that musical thing could be. So I don't know, I'm not memorizing anything that has like a lu sound yet right now, but in Mandarin there are some lu sounds, and sometimes there'll be like lui sounds sort of thing, and I might think of Lou Reed there. Now, does it have to be any particular Lou Reed song? Well, I can't think of a Lou Reed song that compounds this, that doubles down on it. But Take a Look at Me Now is another song by another person, and so that has a more Lou sound in it, right? So I could have Lou Reed singing that to compound on the original, thing. So now think back to that hard diamond metaphor from Bruno that we talked about earlier, right? That's how you make that diamond rock hard, is you have the associations based on gematria, or the alphabet. I think that is the more direct path. But by all means, experiment, and please get back to us. Christian says sentience is overrated. Exactly. Stefos asks, Dr. Metivier, does your book, The Victorious Mind, discuss Advaita or memory for beginners? I would say yes, it does both. But it's not about, I'm not trying to convince anybody to take on Advaita. I myself would not call myself a Vedantin, because the conclusion of Advaita Vedanta is that would be foolish to do so. Because how is that possible? If Advaita is true, then the only conclusion is one, not two. And I think that Bruno is, in his whole career, that is his conclusion as well. And I think you see that most strongly in not just in his books when you parse them and compare them all together and try to come up with a luminous detail of what it all means when you jam it together and you have that thing that is never quite said, but he says it quite clearly in the transcripts of his trials. And he tries to dodge saying it, and it's very, very interesting material. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the victorious mind is about, other than helping people create a victorious mind under the definition of what that I gave in that book of what a victorious mind is all about, which would be something like what we're talking about today, which is to dissolve the notion of separation. In that case, the path that I took was not to memorize Bruno's wheels or his images that he constructed to have the conceptions versus the intentions, so that we could, when a worldly situation comes up, we could have a spiritual response and think about what would the answer be to that, but rather to just dissolve the whole notion that there is a world or spirit, period, because you're here now. Tatvamasi, bang presto, problem solved. We don't, necessarily need to do this, but different strokes for different folks, to each a zone. But thank you for that question. Let's see here. Austin says, once one uses the Feynman technique, abstract concepts can become quite concrete. Indeed. Thank you for that. Galactus says, thanks for all the super practical tips, brother. Hair looks great as usual. Oh, and here I thought I was having a bad hair day. Thank you, Galactus. A great screen name, too. And Kyla says, happy I made it. So grateful for you and your work. Oh, thank you so much, Kyla. Great to see you here. David says, I've been looking on Amazon at all the Bruno books. I wanted just one of his books with content that I could try right away. Is there one that stands out as the most hands-on? At your level, David, probably 30 Seals. There's no perfect answer to this, though. Oh, you got to read Signs on the composition of images, basically. So on the composition of images, you'll love this. And my tip for it is just to read it. Don't think about it too much. Read it and then reread it again. But you're going to find, I think about 30 different ways of composing images. You'll know all of them, I'm sure. But you'll just love it. But yeah, there is no sort of one that is most hands-on. Bruno is more an inspirer of the techniques and showing what he did to accomplish certain goals. And I don't know that he is the hands-on kind of person. Likewise, if you read the texts in the Hermetic Art of Memory, they'll serve you very, very well. But in terms of hands-on, these are books that are, prompting you to do rather than, somehow, I don't even know. Maybe David, say more what you mean by hands-on. Maybe it's more hands-on than I think. I mean, I think what we're doing right now is just about as hands-on as it gets, don't you? Let's see here. King Pap says, hey, Anthony, while I read, I'm trying to train myself to form visual markers while reading very fast. I'm doing that section of Superlearner Method. Do you have any tips for fast marker creation? Yes, that's a good one, King Pap. We'll get back to Bruno here in a second, but if you want to have, well, first of all, marker is, it's an interesting term, but I would not create anything. That's my tip. Learn how to create robust memory systems that do not require you to create things. This is where, people get hung up on the Bruno stuff, because Bruno will tell you what he used as images, but he's not saying use images, or he's not saying create images. He's not saying memorize my images. He's saying learn the systems by which you do not have to create images, right? And so that's my tip for you. And trying to merge the two is great, but creating is not the name of the game. What we want to do instead is assign. And so you mentioned that you are using magnetic memory method. Go into the exercises and then start to assign things. And when you practice this and you get it into your procedural memory, how to do this, assigning rather than creating, you'll be very fast indeed. And also, I would consider, in terms of creating or assigning images while reading, this is not necessarily. It depends on your goal. I do this in a very select way, and if we want to really do it while reading, then I don't know. I'm not sure that is exactly how I would teach reading. Speaking of which, I am thinking of doing a seminar-based course on reading to provide what I feel is a very strong alternative to speed reading, and just to get rid of all the eye training, to get rid of all the subvocalization nonsense, which is 100% pseudoscientific. You need subvocalization. It is normal and natural. There is a very clear history how that this entered the realm of speed reading and is abused and is just the strangest idea on the planet. You want to read faster? Learn how to subvocalize better, or actually focus on subvocalization. Don't sit around trying to get rid of it. This is nonsense. So I'm thinking of doing something around that. So if you'd be interested, let me know. Make sure you're subscribed over at magneticmerrymethod.com, and we will I will be announcing that if I do it soon, because I think those who got Victorious Mind, they got an opening chapter of Smarter, which was the follow-up book. And I haven't released it yet because I realized there's an opportunity to expand that book a little bit and make it into a book that includes how I would approach reading. In terms of my credentials to even be teaching reading, a lot of people don't know this, but I taught at Rutgers. I taught for Kurt Spellmeyer. He was my boss. He was part of a program that was helping improve first-year university literacy. It was very, very successful. He wrote Arts of Living, which is an incredible book. And I think there's many, many better ways to help people read better than sitting around, drawing columns on paper and trying to get your eyes to move less and trying to somehow suppress the very thing that will help you understand what you're reading better. It just disgusts me, the whole subvocalization thing. It's garbage. All right. So that said, there's other questions here. Let's get back to them after and carry on with Bruno. All right. Now, I was laughing earlier because this part about fame is very, very beautiful. Fame is the consideration of the natural by a proportional consideration of the same, which respects not form alone nor material alone, by which nature is marked with a name, but formed matter and material from joined to matter, or material form joined to matter, by which that work is accomplished that is properly called nature. This is that bond which, when it is lacking, no work that nature is capable of performing can possibly be done. Much the less can it be done by art, which follows in nature's footsteps. If it is permitted to dream that something may be less than what is less than nothing, this may be true of art, which not only treats nature as its prime subject, but the natural as its proximate subject. Since all art therefore requires, for its consideration of elements, material reasons suitable for its work, and harmonious forms of which the general goal of all is to make some new form in some subject, thus in this art, which shares its reasons with the reasons of writing in general, and with an excellent mode of proportion, proportioned by two species of manifestation of the same. There is intrinsic painting, which produces images of things and deeds to be remembered. There is also intrinsic painting, or intrinsic writing, which is ordered by reason and words and allots signs, notes, and characters even in subjective images. I am not influenced by what is commonly said, either of memory of things or of the retention of them, by ordered forms they call images. Not indeed. I think that's so funny. I'm not so convinced. Pictures, the term that is properly used in this art, have as their prime subject that on which they are painted, such as walls, stones, and the like. They have as their proximate subject that by which these things are colored, and they have for forms the things drawn in the same colors. Writing has for its prime subject paper, used as a place on which to write. It has for its proximate subject minimum, and has for forms those drawn from among written characters. In the same way, this art admits as its object a twofold subject, the prime, which is the place, and the proximate, which is appropriate to it without adjects. Potentially, it also admits a duplex subject, that is memory and imagination in general, in one place, and the species of imaginable or thinkable things in general in the other place, and it admits as the form the intention and collation of the species that exist in one subject to the species that exist in the other subject. As with painting and writing, which form their material, adapting them to organons, in the same way, in this art, instruments of figuration are not lacking. Now, what the heck of all that does all that mean? Well, I'm not entirely sure I followed the plot. But one of the things that we want to think about is, in painting, there is form and then there's color. And color, expresses mood, and it can express many, many other things. It can express time, for example, like the use of certain colors can tell you something about the shadows that tell you something about the time of day. So it's not so simple that, just form on paper is the thing that expresses the subject of the painting. It can be that form plus color plus particular kinds of color plus particular kinds of color positioned in a particular way with reference to other colors in particular ways give you perspective, but also clues about time of day, the mood at that time of day, etc. So then when you throw into all of that, what he's saying here about, the duplex subject that is memory and imagination in general. On top of all that, you can compare in your memory those things that may connect. So, is it Bosch that has Ship of Fools? And then you can see in Ship of Fools, there's like a fool who's hanging in a particular way, and his body seems to be echoed in Bruegel's The Triumph of Death, right? Now, who's doing that comparison? It's not naturally in the two paintings, but in my mind, one echoes the other. And it's not just the colors, the form, the figure of the fool, but it's also the actual geometrical position that they're in and what that might say at a thematic level. But it's the memory that's doing that. The memory is, in some sense, adding another layer to the painting, or to the paintings in this case, through something that the memory does. Memory is comparison, contrast, and so forth. That's another layer. So, you have this power. You have this ability to do this. This is why your memory techniques are not lacking, just to go into this. Because when you see that you have all the powers of comparison and contrast based on who you are, as you are, you cannot be lacking. You are already full and complete in every possible way. And this is why when you do the exercises, in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, I'm trying to help you experience just how full you are at the deepest possible level of both the canvas, the paint, the paintings that you could create, all just using the alphabet, because you are 100% complete and full, just as you are now. But you do have the image of the fullness yet to come. So you might think, well, I'm rusty with this, or I don't know enough yet, and so forth. Those are images that are either helping you or holding you back from becoming the person you might become. And, each person is going to have different struggles with that and so forth. But the more that you just get involved, practice being that key word that we had before, the more you're going to start to create those diamonds that we talked about, because you are not lacking. You are not lacking. I think this is the whole point here. You have all that you need. You understand what painting is, and you understand the differences between the surfaces that can be painted on. You now know you can paint inside your mind, but you know too that your mind itself can create a layer of painting through connection and comparison, contrast, etc. All right, so hopefully that's clear. Now we will have the art of memory, the second part, and wow, things are really starting to hop now. Are you enjoying this? Let me know in the chat if you're having fun. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't already. If you're new here and you aren't subscribed to this channel somehow, please do. And good to see some people coming in. Threefold consideration of this art is therefore necessary at the beginning. 1, 2, 3. The first part is to consider what and what quality its subject ought to be. The second part is to teach how and in what way its forms ought to appear. The third is to teach the adaptation of the organon and its medium in order to develop skill in the practitioner's soul, all of which is set forth perfectly in the beginning of the Great Key. I just love this. Well, we'll get to it later in the beginning of the Great Key. If you're following the plot, and I hope you are, he's getting to it already. He's already gotten to it. And remember, we've skipped ahead. And if there's enough interest, we will go back to the other parts of this book. So it's just genius. All right. So still, so that this book not be truncated and left imperfect in itself, for it is indeed convenient in transmitting such subordinate disciplines as these to inquire into the first principles of the art. Insofar as the principles that differentiate them are connected to other species, they naturally migrate to the beginning of subordinate sciences. In the third part of the 3 parts of this handbook, we will explain the ordering thereof. The first part concerns the material or the subject. The second concerns the form or the adject. The third concerns the instrument by virtue of which they are made effective, and whence the causes, effective genus, and instrument become the same. The same, become the same. Notice this theme. It comes up again and again. So even though there are contradictory things that are being said at times, he's dealing with people who think they're in a duality, and duality is a thing that appears, but we want to dissolve this. We want it to become one solid fluid motion, to be able to deal with information or to recall the information that we have memorized. Very, very important. Now, the other thing here that we want to seize upon, and this is so, so important, you have probably a sense the minute that I highlight this, just how important this is. Effective. Now, many people come and they say, I want an efficient memory technique. I want my memory to be efficient. No, you need it to be effective. And you can work on efficiency after you've made it effective. So this is a very, very important point to pause upon, because not just because he's pausing upon it, but because that's how you get to efficiency. There is no efficiency without effective skill first. On subjects. First of all, then, the subject is an extension of the technique or an opening ordained to the imaginative faculty. It belongs to the kind of receptacle that is filled from the windows of the soul. It is divided into distinct parts so that it can receive all things seen and heard in their proper order and retain them at will in the soul. This definition relates to the common subject of common forms out of the common art that has been handed down to our time from antiquity. So, subject and adject are terms that come up here. As far as I understand it, the subject is the memory palace. Whether it's a wheel, whether it's the field, whether it's the flag, whether it's all these wonderful ways of assigning information in space that he comes up with, subject is the thing to which you apply the adject. The adject is, as far as I understand it, the association, the magnetic imagery, we would call it in our family. Now, I think that's how it works. I'm not entirely sure, but it seems that way just by the passage that we read, right? So let's look at it again with that in mind. That subject is the memory palace, just to use one term for the idea that you use space as the canvas upon which you paint, or the theater stage upon which you will later put your adjects, your associations, your imagery, right? The stage is the subject on which the adjects move. That kind of works. The stage is subjected to them, that's for sure. It belongs to the kind of receptacle that is filled from the windows of the soul. Receptacle, right? So it receives from the windows of the soul what it is that you project onto that stage. Whether it's a memory wheel that is the stage of your projection, or it is a traditional, whatever that means, a traditional memory palace, whatever it is. Even the major system, in some sense, is the subject, right? Because when you have to memorize a certain number, like I think it was 67 that I had before there, the idea that 6 is a CH and 7 is a hard K or a hard G, that is making it the subject of what we're imposing on it. We're then gonna, for 67 we could have Chucky from Child's Play, or we can have Shakespeare for that matter. Yeah, that's a good one. We are imposing it. We're making the major the subject of the image. And so the image, Shakespeare or Chucky, are the adject that go on the subject. I hope that is correct and clear. That's the way I understand it anyway. In more modern terms, we don't necessarily have to call it subject and adject. But if you wanted to, why not? The prime subject, however, is one of the principles of the great key. By it, the chaos of the imagination is made tractable. The power of thinking is brought back into balance, and be heard in such a way as to produce order and image. Thus, all the members, from the first to the last, are happily able to present those things that are continually perceived by the eyes and the ears, such as an unfamiliar tree or animal, or some newly encountered view of the world. So, as I understand it, he's saying that if you have this stuff, if you have your memory palaces worked out, then you come across a new name for a tree or an animal or whatever it is, bang presto, you got a place for it right there. Right? Newly encountered view of the world. Anything that comes up, you're going to be able to subject or use adjects on subjects, or subject your adjects, whatever, to be able to recall what that was later. This is not at all different from the chaos that can be seen when clouds are blown by a wind outdoors. By the different impulses and proportions of the wind, the clouds can take on infinite and varied figures and forms. This prime subject therefore stands forth as happy and noble, and to experience it is better than any power can judge. It is true enough that from the great key one may call forth anything that can be called forth. Still, it is not given to everyone to reach Corinth. We therefore return now to the subject as defined in the first way. So let's look at this note on Corinth here. A proverb meaning that not everyone can expect to achieve some very good thing. In this case, of course, access to Bruno's secret book. The rest of this section of the book explains how to practice the art of memory without access to the prime image. Now, I think that this reference to Corinth does mean that, but I think it also means more. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that 1 in 999 will understand the text, and not even that one will necessarily use their understanding. So, reaching Corinth does not mean actually making use of the achievement of reaching. And that's something where I think Bruno is pointing out human nature. He points out human nature many times in many ways. And the point really here that we should draw out upon is that activity does not lead to accomplishment necessarily. And so you want to, and he's already mentioned that we need to have the proper things that we're memorizing in order to make sure that true accomplishment actually comes out of all this, which is why I often say memorize information that matters, because you're going to get much more out of it and you're much more likely to actually want to continue using the techniques. But I want to draw ourselves closer to this notion that the memory palaces like the sky or like clouds and so forth. This is really good because in 30 Seals there is a way of using the sky as a memory palace, and in the Aboriginal traditions there are ways of the sky as being a memory palace that you can use. It's very beautiful. But this idea of clouds, in some great philosophy, there's Gilles Deleuze, and he talked about territorialization and deterritorialization. And this is what a cloud is. A cloud is a territorialized space that has now got this pressure and material that has come together at a certain point in order to produce what we see as a shape. But it will eventually deterritorialize and fall down to the earth as rain. So if in your memory work you think, okay, so my memory palace is the sky, or the palette upon which I paint is the sky, and all these associations I'm bringing, they must territorialize a space in that sky and create a shape that allows me to, through association, use that shape to get at the idea. Right? Or whatever it was that we wanted to memorize. This is very, very beautiful. But it doesn't have to stay that way forever. It can dissolve into, back into source, back into origin, and we still have that idea that we wanted to memorize. It's like that, because many times you will memorize things, and it happens to me all the time, and I have no idea what the heck it was, what the cloud was. I don't know. I mean, sometimes I know, but who cares? I mean, clouds are coming and going all the time. What matters is that it gets into the sky behind the sky, which is the great memory itself, right? And you just remember what it was. But you can sometimes reformulate those clouds. So that's a very interesting metaphor, and it is very beautiful to think of it. And if you get 30 Seals, you can see the sky construct that he puts together there for you. All right, so any given subject consists of material parts and is therefore material. See, remember I was saying earlier, he's saying that, there are things that can't be imagined and they're not material and all that sort of stuff. Well, now he's saying every subject does consist of material parts and therefore is material. And I would say that not only is that the case, but if science is true, it's all material because everything is in our brain in the zettabyte that we have available in our brains, as some scientists think. That zettabyte is available precisely because there's a foundation that is chemical, that is encoding the material of information. Information is always material. And so like a cloud is material, it's a material that sits in the material of the sky. It territorializes part of it, and it will later be deterritorialized by the material laws of the universe. Now, I'm not saying that you should think about being a materialist. Rather, I'm just saying that these are words that help us explain things, and whether it's material or not is actually pretty irrelevant at the end of the day. It just is here, appearing. And I don't think any of our 3-pound brains gets to have the final story. All right, so any given subject consists of material parts and is therefore material. Thus, it does not deceive the faculty of sight insofar as the subject may be contemplated by the imaginative faculty as being of the visual order, or using the same parts and principles as in monsters and numberless new metamorphoses which may be taken apart, and the parts regarded as though with a fixed gaze. These parts in their combinations are not allowed in the more material subjects, the art of which is true art, and the faculty a true faculty. In constituting subjects, it is necessary to preserve the ratio between greatness and smallness relative to human size and perceptive capacity, between intensity and remission relative to the limits of the senses, between past and future relative to the present moment, between excessive and deficient parts relative to the integrity of the whole thing that is present, between distance and closeness relative to the capacity for motion, between the beginning and the end relative to whatever is moved by natural motion. I'm not entirely sure what this is all about, but what we can think about anyway is, a lot of people ask me, you say that your images should be huge and enormous and in size, exaggerated. But if I'm in a small little cupboard in my memory palace, or I'm just in this small little corner of the memory palace in the Samalek bookstore, how am I supposed to make this image giant? Well, how indeed? Why not just imagine it being giant? So giant that it's smashing through the walls. Or you could imagine that it is somehow able to be both giant and small at the same time. Why not? We've probably all seen, a comic book image where Ant-Man is small and then big in his normal size, and maybe there's even an episode where he becomes super big, and you have that kind of frame in a comic book frame where you see the progression in a single image. Well, you can do that as well. You can have inside of the tiniest little toothpick case, inside of a very small cupboard, the entire world, the entire universe. And so this is very, very simple. And, if you really want to play around with memory palaces, you can have inside of your little toothpick case, inside of your cupboard, a little Ant-Man. And inside of Ant-Man's little pockets, you could have the entire Marvel cast inside of his pocket. You could have them alphabetically ordered, which is part of what he's talking about here, is ordering things in a way that is conducive to recall. So Ant-Man would be the first guy. Now, Batman, I don't believe belongs to the Marvel Universe. He's DC. But let's just let him go in there anyway, because I can't think of a Marvel character who begins with B. And then, you can have inside of Batman's pocket all of the DC characters. And then you can go to C and you can say, well, hell, I'm tired of Marvel and I'm tired of DC. Let's get Sesame Street in there. So Cookie Monster in his pocket will have all of the Sesame Street characters. And then you go over to D and you're like, now I'm in the Dracula universe. Who belongs to Dracula? And then you go to Van Helsing is in his pocket. Or is it Van Helsing? I don't know Dracula well. But anyway, the point being that, space, size, all this sort of stuff in your present moment, right? You can have an excess of all of this stuff going on. And you can have essentially infinity. And if you know Hilbert's Hotel and the exercise from that, you can double infinity as well, which we won't get into because that's a deviation. But if you want to ever imagine infinity and then have the experience of doubling infinity, get into Hilbert's Hotel. Very, very interesting. Of these, the first is very common to subjects, however much they may be extended. Now remember, subject means the image as far as I understand. Of these, the first is very common to subjects because however much they may be extended, the imagination is able to comprehend this in its folds and to add any quantity you like to what is placed before the eyes. But it is not permitted to subtract anything. So this is basically just saying what I was saying about, adding all kinds of stuff to infinity, right? I don't know what he means by not being allowed to subtract anything, however. The poker players who use memory techniques, they definitely do some subtracting, for example. So when they see that cards are out, they burn them. So if you have an image, like for King of Clubs, you have James T. Kirk, you can burn him, and now you know that card is out. So yeah, I think you can subtract things. But in any case, I may be missing his meaning. The second is common and consists of adding all the parts of the known universe. The third is less common and may be called political. The fourth is specific to individual subjects and may be considered economic. The fifth is more specific and is the division into 4 or the division into 5. The last is most specific and is the atom, and the atom is not in a simple sense, but in its genus. Of these modes, the first excludes itself from being used in the present art. We know, however, of a way in which the infinite may be reduced into a single place and multiplied in the same. So if you get into on the composition of images, you'll be treated to all of this in much more detail, but fascinating stuff. I've also made it a lot simpler in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, all the things he's talking about with specific examples of how it works in the modern world. This also involves a twofold way of working, animate and inanimate. The animate, when subsistent subjects appear illustrated and with their insignia, with adjects, and move about according to some adventitious... Sorry, I made a mistake there. He's talking about subjects as being the memory palaces. But I believe this also... Well, I don't believe, I know it applies also to adjects. This also involves a twofold way of working, animate and inanimate. The animate, when substantive subjects appear illustrated and with their insignia, with adjects, and move about according to some adventitious form. Inanimate things are brought forth in voids and empty spaces. Be careful, therefore, that you do not attempt this with vulgar things. Leave the void to the void, or you will hope in vain to practice this art as I have. As is said, the walls shout, and stones will give their voices. Okay, so what is this warning all about? Let me just read it again. The animate, when substantive subjects appear illustrated and with their insignia, with adjects, and move about according to some adventitious form. So this is where the terminology can get a little bit complicated. So your subject, your memory palace, is now illustrated with adjects, and the adjects are moving about. And I'm not sure, like, adventitious if he's meaning for some material purpose. But there's a warning here. Inanimate things are brought forth in voids and empty spaces. Be careful, therefore, that you do not attempt this with vulgar things. Leave the void to the void, or you will hope in vain to practice this art as I have. So basically, I'm imagining that maybe there's some people who are trying to get rich or something from using their memory techniques. Maybe they're memorizing all of the codes and nodes and forking terms related to cryptocurrency, and they're just like, hot damn, I'm going to be the cryptocurrency trader of all time because I've got all the knowledge memorized in my memory palaces, and when I come to do whatever tradey thing that I'm going to do with my cryptocurrency, it's going to be so great because I am the master of the cryptocurrency knowledge, right? He's saying that's the void. That's vulgar. That's a vulgar use of the memory techniques. And if you want to practice it the way old Bruno has, then, stay away from that stuff. Memorize something higher than that. Because, crypto may be decentralized, but it's still material, right? As are all things in their way they appear to be. Anyway, I don't know that that's exactly what the warning is, but perhaps a contemporary analogy. And I've certainly had people requesting the path to memorizing things of that nature. Whereas in those sorts of worlds of trading, it may be experience that helps you make decisions better than this or that terminology. So, commit general things to general things, the less general to the less general, the specific to the specific, the more and most specific to the more and most specific. Here you have a theme for consideration that will not only make you free of all fear of forgetting, but indeed will give you a more perfect way of imagining and writing, as well as a method of methods for invention and disposition, and doing so more quickly and securely. Here you have in this mode the first of the foundations of the great key. So part of the message here is that if you are memorizing information that legitimately improves your life and ideally helps you improve the lives of others, your practice is better from the get-go and can be better as you go, because you're going to have, I think he's probably referring to that fulfillment, that edification, that elucidation that comes from actually memorizing something that matters immediately, that's useful, and translates for you to be a better person in the world. You're better able to navigate in a way that is making others better. So, in other words, if you do it for yourself, you're doing it for nobody, because there is no self, right? There is only the sort of appearance of people that seem to be separated from you. But when you realize that everything is actually a production of your brain cells, there can be no separation, because that person that is appearing in you, it's in your chemical makeup, it's in your cells. So why wouldn't you try to be the best possible person for them so that you could serve them? And this is in so many of the traditions. It's in everything really that matters, that you are the servant of the things that appear in you, because you're not separate from them. You're just serving yourself because it is yourself, right? This whole thing that appears is you, nothing else. Tattvamasi. All things, natural, physical, and technical, admit of form. Forms that produce images are proportionate to their images in quantity, and for this reason you will remember that nature herself cries out, prescribing that species have their greater and lesser limits, and insofar as they undertake to obey the law, it is not permitted that any amount of matter should take any form. What is considered the upper limit of measure is referred to the ancients, who reflected a great deal on forms or their adjects and were accustomed most often to assign them to subjects. Where there is no crystalline limit visible on high against which your intention can strike, nor draw back beneath those limits insofar as they move less swiftly to the inner eye, or at least are rendered more convenient. Let's look at footnote 82. A poetic smile. Bruno used the image of the supposed crystalline spheres of heaven, which were rejected by Copernicus, to equate the unlimited space of the Copernican universe with the unlimited potential he saw in his art of memory. Yes, and I think too, there's another thing here, that we have the problem of what I tend to call the challenge frustration curve. So a lot of people, they can never benefit without taking on the challenge. You need the challenge to grow. But then there are other people who, take on the challenge and they get fairly good with the techniques, but then they get to a certain thing they want to work with the memory techniques and they get frustrated. So then they just give up instead of scaling back to where you are challenged. Because this idea that, there's endless potential and so forth, this is meaningless. Like, what does it mean to have, like I often say, and it is meaningful in its context, but ultimately meaningless. Where preparation meets opportunity, there is no ceiling, right? This is just a metaphor that basically means when you're ready to rock and roll, you're going to be able to take advantage of things and have a great outcome. That's all that means, right? But this no ceiling sort of stuff, this is not really realistic. Rather, what we want to do is be balancing this challenge frustration curve. So, we are thrown into the world, we are given the circumstances that we are given, and then we have these skills, and we know that we need to take on challenge in order to grow. We don't necessarily have to do the Jordan Peterson thing where it's like, take on the biggest cross that you could possibly bear. You can do that, but you don't necessarily have to. There are contexts in which that would be pretty foolish, right? So we need discernment. You don't have to take on the biggest cross that you can bear, although you might want to in certain circumstances. I don't mean to disparage Dr. Peterson in that unfunny routine, but I rather mean to say that it can't be a catch-all for all people. For some people in some circumstances, it is more than enough to just simply take on the thing that challenges you in a way that helps you grow. And then if it gets frustrating, know how to scale back. So that I think is very hopefully clear. You should be careful in making images not to do any of the things that should be avoided in external writing. Thus, I do not suggest that one subject should be put right up against other subjects, nor that you should neglect to distinguish proper limits and intervals, nor that you should mix proper figurations with alien ones, for then they will block your conjectures and prevent you from attaining any other. As letters that are written over letters and seals that are made over seals, these either destroy each other or at least confound each other, no less with subjects than with things annexed and connected to them. But if your images are continuous and contiguous and not set apart by an interval of appropriate breadth, I implore you to recognize that you will run into confusion. So here he's referring to some of the ancient teachings where they talk about having, a certain amount of space between your stations in a memory palace, making sure that it's in daylight, all that sort of stuff. And he's talking about reusing memory palaces and the confusion that can come from, letters that are written over letters and seals that are made over seals. These either destroy each other or at least confound each other, no less with subjects. So if you're using a memory palace as your subject and you're writing multiple images over it and the palimpsest gets confusing, no doubt, because you might not be ready for that yet. And even those who are ready for it, you're usually cruising for a bruising. It's not the most effective thing in the world, although it is possible and it's fun to experiment with. And man, have I had some fun experimenting with it. But if you're not using a memory palace and you're just purely using adjects like a wheel or whatever, insofar as the wheel is actually necessary to do this, you also need to make it clean and not overwrite things necessary. And the whole idea is not to have a wheel superimposed over a wheel, but rather a wheel inside of a wheel, as I understand it, so they can turn. And so whatever letter I is on the material concern wheel, then when you link it up with letter J, let's say on the spiritual wheel, then when you consider the two together, the spiritual response to the material concern, that third thing that emerges, is clean and clear because you're not overwriting on each wheel. Because otherwise, as he says, you will run into confusion. In the same way, subjects should be chosen so that they have definite means, lengths, heights, breadths, and differences of their outward limits, and other habitudes differentiating themselves from one another. So in other words, when I say memory palace, 2 to 5 minutes max, definite means you want just simple, the simplest possible thing, because you could just lead yourself into endless traps of perfectionism or noodling around instead of just creating a simple tool for your memory palace or your subject. For all virtues are presented by nature and affect the eye either externally or internally by their colors as well as the location of their light sources and the differences of their outward limits, proceeding from the principles of perspective, both optical and catoptrical, to achieve the most wonderful appearances. If the reasoning mind creates subjects that do not possess these properties by themselves, the thinking process, as I have indicated, attempts to put them in either by adding something external to the subjects or adding something appropriate to them, so that by congruent formations, one or the other is able to provide the materials. By subtraction, a statue of Mercury is made out of a rock. By addition, a ship is built from wood. By compression and division, an effigy is made of wax. By drawing things out, a figure is made from lines. By alteration, wine becomes vinegar. Similar changes are wrought in other things by commingling, separation, solution, consequence, and continuation for the changing of forms, and so universally among all the mutable things of nature. So this is more things I think that come clear on composition of the images, or on the composition of images. And subtraction, before we said you can't subtract things, now we're saying we can. And I think here, the point is the statue of Mercury is made out of a rock. Well, how? Because we subtract all the stuff that is not Mercury, right? In this sense. In addition, a ship is built from wood. So now, is this an addition thing? No, not necessarily. It's and if you think of the ship of Theseus, it can be both the initial creation, but then also replacements. So, if you let's say you have a memory palace and you realize you've gone through it, you've memorized something, and you realize, man, that journey into the kitchen was just a distraction, right? Well, you could maybe remove it. You could subtract it and have a more clean and clear journey. Or you could say, addition, you could say, that kitchen, wow, there's actually a spot there where I could build a ship right in there, or I could add something to it, and so forth. So you got compression, division, all this sort of stuff. You can think of different metaphors. The whole thing is that, there's mutability as you go along. It also must not be forgotten that subjects ought to be considered when they are viewed in internal cogitation in a way that is proportioned to the gaze of the eyes. In the outer world, sensible things are not sensed when they are inherent in the organs of sense, and sensible things that are extremely far from the organs of sense, lack the power to be sensed. A book may not be read if it is either too close to the eyes or too far from them, and in the same way, in placing the internal gaze, you should so regulate matters that as its faculties are placed at a middle distance relative to the power of extension, that it may form and shape the object itself. So in other words, if I'm following the plot here, you could make a memory palace on Pluto, right? And, navigating that memory palace on Pluto is possible. But is it as immediate and useful to you as the memory palace just down the street, right? Distance can matter, especially when you have all of these things inside of that memory palace that you want to deal with. It is important to remember that subjects that are believed and memorized are naturally easier to remember when they are brought to mind by considering them. This is interesting. If you believe it, you may be able to remember it better. Do you think that's true? I wonder if there are any comments in the chat or on the replay. Oh, it's good to see you, Kurt. Thank you for being here. Didn't see that. Wonderful. Yeah, so believing something could make it easier to remember. I don't know. I mean, I remember Bereshit bara lachim v'hashet v'hashamayim tohu v'ahu, all that stuff. I don't believe it, but it was pretty easy to remember. He may be referring to truth and lies, because lies can be very, very difficult to remember, especially since they're not true, and you have to organize them in certain ways. So your level for failure is very high. But when things are true, you actually have multiple ways to recall them, and you don't have to worry about the exact wording, right? So maybe that's what is going on here. From this consideration proceeds an impoverishment of memory, as some believe they have formed a subject, or that they gaze attentively at what is figured, when actually they do not. For one thing is placed under another thing, as though they wrote in shadow or under a veil. So it may be that he's actually referring to imaginary memory palaces, which wouldn't entirely make sense, because the wheel would be imagined insofar as you are imagining a display of the alphabet. But that's the thing. The order of the alphabet is not imagined. The order of the alphabet is learned by you at an early age and is just sort of a given that it is that way. You can reorder the alphabet if you want, but it's a free structure that is truly A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. I mean, that's just the way that it goes. And so if you were to make an imaginary version of that's all out of order, A, Z, B, Y, C, X, etc., that could be harder to recall. The spacing of subjects determines their continuity and their distribution. In order to distinguish them, it should be considered that the space between one subject and another should be just so much as will seem to be abolished and deleted. On the contrary, where there is a continuum and so much uniform space that it goes beyond what is enough, its natural effect is to join the subjects together. You ought to order your positions one after another and conceive the subjects as marked with adjects. What then prevents the ancient imagination from returning here, so that it may happen that I touch it anew? Indeed, this imagination, which could be put in place of truth, cannot be lightly had or lightly formed, for cogitation is inherent in it. Insofar as they are customary to you, they are in no wise seen to be different from truer things. In this, however, you may excel to some degree by practice. So what he's saying is you want to consider having things in a particular order, but you can practice playing around. Key term here, practice. Reviewing the subjects is to be done repeatedly, insofar as it brings advantage which the present method is able to do. So he's not saying, don't repeat things, but rather do so insofar as it is an advantage to refresh your memory. So surely you are not ignorant of the way that those who are accustomed to read much do so more swiftly than can be readily believed by those who must pick through words a letter at a time, seeing that writing is composed of letters. In the same way, practice leads to a more perfect way of doing, which is without thought, which is achieved by practicing solely and very intently upon single parts and elements, which are repeated and guided by thought. The most perfectly practiced guitarists act solely by habit, not by thinking about their guitar playing. Others, by means of touch alone, can achieve the same thing. Those who have not practiced to that measure, they are considered beginners, and as much more so, as they have to think about their playing. This shows the power of practice even to the vulgar. The way that mere water is able to wear a hole in hard marble or iron shows this to the perceptive. The perceptive. I think the student who hears the Tao and practices it assiduously is very different than the one who, says, oh, well, I can practice today and practice tomorrow, but no, I have to, and then there's the other one who laughs at the truth, right? Remember that from the Tao Te Ching? And it is said in the Tao Te Ching that if he did not laugh, it would not be the Tao. And here's something that I think it runs quite parallel here. We need to practice in order to get that sort of guitar thing. Now, I think, though, there's a missing step here. And I don't know what guitarists of the era were like then. But now we have jazz, guitarists, and they do memorize licks. In fact, some of what they're doing is it is the automatic recalling, but it comes from a kind of deep absorption of licks, and so much soloing is snapping on little ideas onto keys that you know where you need to go based on the chord that you're in, and it's just sort of firing this stuff off. So it's not that there's thought, but rather you are able to fire things off in the same way that if you wanted to make a reference to Tao Te Ching, you could, right? I didn't fire off the exact wording there, but I riffed on it, and it's just sort of played out that way from Tao Te Ching. Or it could be a much more dead-on quote, like, for example, if we wanted to pull something out of the Bible, I think Proverbs 18:13 or something is to answer without listening, that is folly and shame. That kind of thing is now a very distinctly memorized phrase rather than noodling on a phrase that has been committed to memory. All right. Still, is anything concerning this matter more abundantly manifest? We do not neglect to discuss it, not at all indeed because it is not manifest enough, but because the subject of this proposition is worth any amount of trouble. They know that one of the working rules of the ancients is to set subjects far apart from one another and to do the same with very many of them. In this way, they can bring them forth to expression by one act of cogitation, no less swiftly and exactly as if they read them on paper. To those who are unskilled and those who first grid themselves for the work, this commonly appears incredible. Indeed, it brings the opposite conviction. Still, what if this is done by the ancient arts, and we see it to be done with every day, which I say can be brought about with the very briefest delay by practice? These arts will appear to you greater, better, and more accurate in 3 or 4 revolutions of the moon, which 6 revolutions of the sun would otherwise be needed to accomplish. You have no idea how brilliant this is, because some of the best science in habit formation shows us 90 days practice minimum. Now, in meditation, it can be 4 times a week, many studies show, but you're still better off if you do it every day. 3 or 4 revolutions of the moon. I mean, I don't even know how the moon revolves, but I'm assuming that's 3 or 4 months. And so someone can let me know what a revolution of the moon is all about. Maybe it's longer, but if it is 3 or 4 months, I mean, this is someone perceiving something that has been demonstrated in our contemporary science. Thus, we find the way to commit to memory any subjects whatsoever, one at a time, and to retain each of them in its proper place and in greater scale and number, which is demonstrable by the arcana of the great key. What, how many, and in what way it will touch upon these things, others will see for themselves, so that they are able to judge rightly of both. By the way, these mentions of the great key, I have another theory, which is not only that he was a marketer of his books yet to come, but it may be that he had in mind that actually the great key is you putting this into action. And there are other indications of this throughout the literature where I think that this comes out. The theme of practice, the theme of the extent to which practice should be applied, etc., that is the great key that unlocks the skill, is it not? Even if that's not what he means, we can mean it now. If you want the great key, it is practice. And if you want the skill, it is practice. And if you want it to be automatic, if you want to memorize numbers automatically, then, if you see a number like 9132, you want to see Batman that quickly. Why Batman? Well, because the major tells us that 9 is a B, T is a 1, 3 is an M, 2 is an N. So why wouldn't 9132 be Batman? If you saw that number, you'd want Batman that quickly. How do you get that? You practice. Well, first of all, you create your systems or assign your systems. We don't really create them. And then you practice using them. You may therefore behold the variety that is so eminently brought forth by nature. The members of the world are diverse. Diverse are the forms in the members of the world. Diverse are the figures in individual forms. No one olive is exactly the same shape as any other. No one man is exactly like any other. Thus, all things differing are of distinct capacity, and one by one and all by all are properly set apart by their own differing limits. Thus, you should try whatever will conform to nature in all her diversity, in mode of subsistence, magnitude, form, figure, habit, condition, limit, and place, and as frequently as you can, put in differences in acting, being acted upon, growing, ceasing, subtracting, adding, and changing in other modes, as we have said. The terms being and one are said interchangeably. Whatever is not one is not a being, and every single thing we must therefore perceive as a unity, because what is proper to it is bounded by what is different from it. Uniformity nauseates all the senses, both when one particular quality is repeated until it no longer delights, and when one and the same thing lasts unchanged for an immoderate time, for the senses suffer when they are affected by one and the same mode exactly. This has not escaped those who consider the very swift flowing of all natural things, as it is impossible to step in the same river twice, or indeed even once. Very, very important passage, right? This is, I think he's, in our contemporary scientific terms, he's talking about the escape from the default mode network and the bliss of the task positive network. So instead of the I, me, oh, worry, you're just living in the zone. Yes, now. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful passage. From this, my neighbor has a great penchant for reminding me about the present moment, doesn't she? From this depends the affectivity of subjects. By affectivity, I mean that which acts on the faculty of the emotions, which among other things is produced by the allurement or stimulus of variety, by the intrinsic nature of the subjects, and is indicated by their position. Variety. This is very, very important. What we know from memory science in terms of what's called active recall, we need variety and we need personalization. So this is a great point. For this reason, it is thought appropriate by some to add a certain subject to the principal subjects, so that even if these do not have affectivity of themselves, they would receive it from these others as though by the addition of a graft. But why? So I think what he's talking about is, maybe a couple of things. He's talking about, how do I extend my memory palace? How do I reuse a memory palace so I don't get ghosting by adding a feature? So I have the green version, the red version, etc. That might be what he's talking about. But why? This is so beautiful. Why not just focus on the fundamentals and have good goals, and then make using those strange and wonderful things something you do experimentally? But when push comes to shove and you're working on the information that matters, why add a graft? Why play these games with these tools? Yes, you can go out of your home, and instead of walking on the street, you could immediately have another Mary Palace that is a shopping mall. And yes, in that shopping mall, you could have it whiz-bang connected in a razzmatazz way to Disneyland if you want. But why? I mean, it's just the perfect question. And it's an important question because they're already connected. You don't need to do some special thing. They're connected through the alphabet. They always already were, insofar as you are a person who comes into the world and is trained to have this remarkable tool, the gematria, fancy word for alphabet. Gematria meaning very specifically the idea that every letter is not only a sound that corresponds to a thing that's printed in a book, but also a number and also an object. So this is, this is the greatest gift. That's what we're doing in memory techniques. We're making every letter a number. We're making every number a letter. We're making sure that every single thing is deeply personalized so that we have that variety that makes information so much more profound and alive and easy to recall. And, we have this tool, this simple tool of assigning it to space. So why do we need to graft on one Mary Palace to the other? Yes, you can go from your driveway and automatically go into another Mary Palace to extend it. But why? Because you can just simply do that anyway, right? You think of the next thing you need to memorize, and it's just like, oh, bang presto, alphabet. I have a B Mary Palace ready to go. Or if you have your wheel, you have this ready to go. Or multiple wheels, really, at the end of the day. So I love this. But why? The more affectivity that subjects themselves give out and are given, the more powerful and subtle the effects with which they move the imagination and enter and re-enter the palace of memory. Thus the spurs, the cleverness, and the goads. Thus the seasonings, thus the forgetting, while they try to remember, repeat, recapitulate, and resume, as though by diversity or alternation, or by better means which I propound, or by all these things in diverse manners, they hope to summon the spirit of memory. So there must have been the memory equivalent of sophists who, are a lot of talk and they do a lot of activity, but they never actually do the practice to the point of becoming masterful in any way with the techniques. And so he's saying, there's a better means that I have here for you, and it's great. Yeah, it might be a little simpler than some of the games you can play with memory techniques, but why not focus on the fundamentals? This latter comes very easily to those who practice with a mind as little disturbed as possible. Otherwise, the more disturbance becomes, and the more heated it is, the more they tend to confusion. How many are the kinds of virtue in affectivity, and in what way they can be called forth, preserved, and varied, will be presented in no little detail in the book, The Great Key, for $49.99. Book now. Pre-order. Okay, so let me check in with the chat before that we get into the adjects. So let's see here. The major method will allow you to convert numbers into pictures. You put pictures into a memory palace. When you want to recall the numbers, go through the memory palace and recall the images. Yes, beautiful. Thank you, David. Thomas McDonald says, through life, an emotional brand on the soul or being. Then we use this memory as a room in the palace. I'm not sure what you mean, but feel free to repeat that in other words. And Stefo says, shut-eye time. Okay, great. Thank you for being with us. Christian says, achieve results because this is the natural way, from the Tao Te Ching. Alejandro says, the moon takes about 1 month to orbit Earth, 27.3 days to complete a revolution, but 29.5 days to change from new moon to new moon. Beautiful. Thank you for that. So practice, variety, and personalization. Taking note. Beautiful. All right. So is everybody having fun? Should we continue? I think so. Let's go on to the adjects. Adjects or general forms are therefore defined by subjects, whether these are physical, technical, or imaginative subjects, so that by the skillful application of thought, something that is to be expressed and signified may be presented, portrayed, noted, or indicated in the similitude of writing and painting. In this, reason respects the common forms that have come down to our times from antiquity. Its form is that which is derived from fundamentals in the great key. It is produced and explained according to the order of the forms of thought, in statues or the microcosm, or generally disposed in other forms of architecture, so that whatever can be spoken may be written internally or portrayed by drawing upon the chaos of the imagination, which admits of all metamorphoses. The type thereof is not only described here, but we have presented it for your consideration as well. All right. So there is a figure that is missing, and it was most likely an image of the universe that we would have seen there. There is chaos in your nature primordially, which does not exclude the order and series of elements and numbers. This must be understood not only in the sense that what is unformed may be formed, but also that it is necessary to conceive what is formable in due order. That's interesting, right? As you can see, it is distinguished by diverse intervals in it and in its parts which form the whole figure, which are designated by its creator as elements. The letter A, by means of the unformed numbers and elements, runs through the circuit and the radius. It impresses another figure by Aries, another by Taurus, others in their turn by the remaining signs. Another by Aries when Saturn returns to it, another when Mars revisits it, and so with the others, and still another with any of the planets. In this way, the subject may be formed and reformed to an infinite degree, either by its numbers or its elements, or drawn in diverse ways by those things that move and affect it. This is what it is to bring form to formless chaos, or to form the same with forms. You may refer either to things that give form or to things that receive it. It makes no difference to the proposition. So we're revisiting some territory that we've seen before, but I think that the idea of, an individual memory being like a planet is quite good. And in your brain cells, obviously it doesn't work exactly that way, but it is at some level some sort of electrochemical thing, and certainly you can think of how the synapses work to form deeper connections with one another in order for your positive and negative ions to flow much more quickly. And although it's not the same as the way planets form and perhaps they burst into other things, or maybe like a star forms, and later when the star dies it has gases and things like that form an atmosphere or a crust that then later gases push up to create an atmosphere, etc., etc. This is like what's happening inside of ourselves, inside of our brains. Not exactly like this, but we have the idea that memory, an individual memory, is kind of like the formation of a star. It is that complex because or the death of a star that turns into a planet, whichever model you want to use. The point is there's multiple moving parts. Even at the smallest level of the part, there's multiple moving parts. And one memory can have things that sort of rotate around it and have this sort of solar system that builds gradually, and they can refer to each other insofar as they're aware of each other. Beautiful. Nonetheless, there is that which remains unchanged and submits to the extent that it submits and is formed. It is considered to be as feminine as water and wholly formless, so that it may be formed by influences from any source. And we'll look at the note here. The elements were gendered in Renaissance thought. Fire and air were masculine, water and earth feminine. And he may be thinking of the foundation of consciousness here, not entirely sure. It is, according to the common judgment, the most perfect chaos if it is composed of unordered things conjured from thin air, but this cannot be used at all. That which is useful must be obedient to the numbers and elements of memory, which are disposed according to a certain order, from which come moving and shaping principles, while other things that are to be remembered are able to accept forms. These, however, as you will see, so disposed by order that they are never able at any time to occupy the same circuit or radius, whether according to element or number. Many other most excellent things can be drawn forth from this figure, but this is not the place for that to be done. Whether it is appropriate to consider doing this, I have not yet decided, but this much I affirm. The one thing I would wish to say is that if you were to contemplate that figure according to the reasons explained here, you would be able to acquire the art of figuration to such a degree that it would confer upon you that which would wondrously help not memory alone, but that as well as every other power of the soul. Big promise here. I wonder if there's a a government of memory that helps protect us from such claims. But this is part of the project that Bruno imagines, or at least commentators say that he imagines, and I'm not sure that he does when you get to the trial documents anymore, but rather has come to a different conclusion, which is not that different. But, this idea of being able to become the thing that you meditate upon, that you have memorized, if you were to meditate upon the sun and you had certain facts about it, etc., certain numerical figures and so forth, you could become like the sun, perhaps, is maybe what he's referring to, that sort of notion. I'm not sure that you could, but the higher thing would be, could you become just like what you are becoming? Could you become pure emergence and maintain that sense of becomingness in a way that is beautiful and wonderful and like the bliss that some of the spiritual traditions propose? And the answer is, as far as I can tell, yes, you can. And it's a beautiful thing to do. And a lot of working with these techniques can help you get there, provided that the information is conducive to that goal. It must therefore be noted first, concerning adjects, that their proper proportions are between excess and diminution, intensification and remission, past and future, distance and propinquity, appropriate to man's size or the half thereof, and to his gaze, and in the present time in which memory ought to be. Of adjects, now remember, adjects, as I understand it, are the images that are imposed on the subject or the memory palace or the memory wheel or the location. Of adjects, some are animate and they are able to act as simultaneously. Let me try again. Of adjects, some are animate and they are able to act simultaneously as efficient, adjacent, and operative organons. Others are inanimate, and those belonging to this category act as adjacent and operative organons only. Of animate objects, in turn, some participate in reason and so are apt to every kind of action and passion and also have a neutral mode. Others are without reason, and concerning them, as is well manifest, there is not enough agreement in the world. Indeed not. Furthermore, some adjects are natural and others are artificial. Some pass from the external senses to the internal senses, while others are formed in the internal senses themselves, of which the species are forms, similitude, image, figure, example, character, and sign, distinguished according to the formal significations that are revealed in the considerations of the great key. Concerning magnitude, adjects are customarily made commensurate with their subjects, just as occurs in natural things, for otherwise they would easily be lost and the visual imagination either blunted or scattered. So what does this mean? It means commensurate. There needs to be some, way that what you place is where you place it. It can't be like scattered leaves in chaos all over the place. It takes a long time indeed to write in very small letters on an ample page, and it is more difficult to do. Because of its mass, in turn, a tree that fills or exceeds the space around it does not present a clear figure to the observer. For these reasons, we have tested a method by means of a certain industriousness, whereby a certain moderate and secret subject of the visual imagination is offered in addition. This is combined with the form of another adject by which it is customarily held and accompanied, as the archer carries a bow, or carries an arrow, the scribe a pen, and the shoemaker an awl. These have so much virtue in connecting, linking, preceding, accompanying, and following, that they make invisible things visible, intelligible things apparent through the sensible universe, and things difficult to grasp, easily comprehended. This is an interesting point, because if you've seen my video on the 3 mistakes that memory experts often make, they often say, you should only memorize things after you've understood them. No, and 1,000 times no. You can help yourself comprehend precisely by memorizing things. Now, obviously, there is a place for understanding things before you memorize, but if you're sitting around going, I don't understand this, memorizing it may well, in many cases, be your best path to memorizing, to understanding it. And I would highly recommend memorizing some stuff, because you will be astonished. Even just a simple song. I memorized the lyrics for Lou Reed's My House, I think it's called. Or is it My Home? No, I think it's Our House. My House, is it called? I can't even remember the title of the damn thing. But anyway, it's something that I didn't even really understand what he's talking about until that I had sung through it a couple times from memory. And I realized that he starts the beginning of the song with my house. And then at the end of the song, he calls it our house. And you realize all of a sudden the character in the story has undergone a transformation. I never would have noticed that if I hadn't memorized it. It's a very beautiful thing that happens when you memorize things and you get to understanding. Now, concerning quality, whether they be visible or imaginary things, adjects must be able to set thought into motion, whether by being something admirable, frightening, funny, sad, pleasant, hateful, abominable, probable, wonderful, prodigious, hoped for, suspected, or anything else, or suspect, or anything else. I thought that was a new word, suspected, or suspect, or anything else that bursts in upon our most powerful feelings and bring themselves along with the feelings. Let me do this again, because this is really important. Concerning quality, whether they be visible or imaginary things, adjects must be able to set thought into motion, whether by being something admirable, frightening, funny, sad, pleasant, hateful, abominable, probable, wonderful, prodigious, hoped for, suspect, or anything else that bursts in upon our most powerful feelings and bring themselves along with the feelings. So what is being said here? This is the rules of exaggerating your associations, exaggerating what you do. You make it funny. You make it admirable. You make it abominable. You make it wonderful. You make it all these things in a way that carries you to the answer, carries you to what you're trying to recall. Thus, you should be careful not to stray from a sober understanding of the mode of our precepts, in which we enumerate the species of adjects, that is, signs, insignia, characters, and sigils. You should modify all of these by that. Let me look at this note first. In Renaissance writing, in Renaissance writings, the latter two terms were typically used for magical symbols. So characters and sigils are referring to magical things. You should modify all of these by that all has been discussed under the things pertaining to quantity, that your eye may be fixed in contemplation on that which is presented for consideration in the great key, inasmuch as nothing is to be admitted to memory from the senses and the imagination except by way of the cognitive faculty. Concerning relation, adjects must not be applied to subjects as though by accident, as though they happen to be thrown together. Rather, what is referred to should be comprehended so as to be comprehensible. Garments should be things that are proper to be worn, and protections to protect. Each is connected to the other in such a way that nothing can slip in between them. Now, is this true? Is this the case? I don't know. I don't think so. But if you're a beginner, you may want to think about these sorts of things. Some people say that your images should be logical. They should be congruent. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for incongruity, that things do not have to be properly worn. So if you, for some reason, have to memorize something and you come up with an image of Ronald McDonald, for example, why should Ronald McDonald wear his proper costume? Why can't you dress him up like a G.I. Joe to help you remember something? You can, and you should. So I don't quite follow the point here. But it can be that, they just didn't have clowns dressing as soldiers that much. Although, I don't know. No, I don't know when King Lear was written, so it may have been after Hamlet, and he wouldn't have had that opportunity, but he would have known the fool character. In any case, I'm not sure why that this is a needed consideration. Every part of one should be related to every part of another as pertinent or as belonging to what is pertinent, ordered or disordered, resistant or compliant, and so on universally, so that each concept is connected to the other concept. What adject could conceive so royal a dignity when separated from any subject? Thus, adjects are understood together with their subjects like letters carved into stone, rather than fluttering about in the wind or being confused as happens to figures written in the sand. Adjects are also understood as acting in a subject and in individual subjects, or to be acted on by subjects or in subjects. So this is interesting, right? The memory palace, the subject, the adject acts in it or is acted upon by it, right? So you can imagine your memory palace doing something to your imagery. It doesn't have to be, but you can. I say that every action or passion is to be considered vivifying, since by any motion the inner vision, which is as asleep, is roused as though by being shaken, wandering, going over, going under, going to, going from, going with, ascending, descending, meeting, departing, avoiding, or fleeing, or with some subject. Adjects bring strike, push, exclude, deprive, lead, overturn, bend, vex, throw, twist, drop, demolish, break, erect, raise, uproot, stretch, scratch, clean, remove, empty, or drain. None of this may be done unless adjects are annexed and fixed to subjects, but the more fixed they are, the better, for the ability to make all these changes is founded on fixity and perseverance. I would say yes and no in my experience, because I don't need them to be fixed, but they are fixed at the same time. So some people say, like, how do I connect it to the memory palace? Well, I never connect things to the memory palace. First of all, any memory palace I use is not connectable because it's imaginary, right? How can you connect one imaginary thing to another? This is folly to try to do that. Things in the world connect. This Spider-Man web connects, to the wall. Well, actually, that's imaginary, isn't it? But we can imagine that actually happening, a web connecting to a wall. But in the mind, the web is just there in the wall, and I can imagine that it's connected there, but I don't need it to be connected there. I can imagine the spider web just hanging in space. Now, this is the key thing where I would agree, is that whatever is in space needs to be basically exactly where it was when you fixed it in your memory work. So when I'm sometimes giving these examples in Sanskrit or whatever, or if I think back to Sie hat uns nicht gefragt, als wir nach kein Gesicht, ob wir leben wollen oder lieber nicht. Something like this. I go back into, I actually don't go back into it. But if I were to go back into the memory palace where that lives, I can think of Sie hat uns nicht gefragt. Yeah, so like I can see that Marlene Dietrich was my bridging figure in a memory palace in Berlin. And I don't really actually remember the images, and I'm pretty sure that's what the lyrics are. Sie hat uns nicht gefragt, als wir nach kein Gesicht, ob wir leben wollen oder lieber nicht. I remember somehow this lieber nicht thing. I just have this fruit cart there to have that ob wir, like OB, because the word for fruit is Obst in German, and it was just there. It's not that it is on the floor. It's not that it's hanging from the ceiling. It's not that it's attached to the wall. It's just there in reference. So I don't feel that this is coherent with my experience, but it is also at the same time, it's fixed generally in front of the wall where I used to sit my bike, right? And it needs that reference because when you go back to do your recall rehearsal, you need to have something. But does it have to interact with the memory palace? No, it's a theater stage, right? It's already interacting with it as such, but it's just happening. It's happening because you close your eyes and you think, what was there? Anyway, that's a beautiful song, by the way. What is it called? Wenn ich mir was wünschen dürfte. Oh, it's such a beautiful song. I won't torture you with my singing it, though. But it's such a lovely song. wenn ich mir was wünschen dürfte. Yes, I am torturing you. Käme ich in Verlegenheit. Oh yes, beautiful song. You should not, however, give up hope of achieving this stability, for continuous motion does not lack its own stability insofar as it is continuous. It is for this reason that the poet calls fortune constant in her inconstancy. This will serve equally well with variety, multitude, speed, and slowness, nor are these lacking conditions pertaining to the quality of adjects. As in subjects, so in adjects, uniformity is to be avoided. This should be done, and now, what is the opposite of uniformity? Variety, right? This should be done as much as possible, for having a variety of things to choose from, as explained above, is consonant with nature. Thus, pertanto variar natura e bella, or maybe it would be bella. Through all her changes, nature is lovely. It is permissible to apply the same adject to different subjects so long as the adject alone. Wait a second. It is permissible to apply the same adject to different subjects so long as the adject alone and over the range of its applications implies differing actions and has different species according to the habitudes of the subjects. Okay, so this is important. How do you get variety? You complete the exercises. It's just that simple, right? And the more that you have, the more you will be like nature. I think this is the key point that we need to really bring out here. So those of you in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, get your exercises done. Do them 2 to 3 times a year at least. That's what I do. And you will be more like nature because you will have more variety in your imagination through your associations. And nature is a thing that has variety. Very, very important point. What is the opposite of nature? Maybe there isn't one, but it would certainly be death. Now, this is complicated because where is death? Death is in me when I think about it, right? I can't possibly ever die because I would not be here to experience the actual death that I am only conceiving of. So therefore, death is not the opposite of nature. Death is an idea that appears in the thing that I call nature or that we call nature. And it's very much alive. But the thing is that we can still be the opposite of nature in terms of becoming stagnant, in terms of becoming rusty, in terms of not being well exercised, in terms of not taking action that constantly keeps us free and limber and, ready to rock. And so the more you exercise, the more you practice, the more you are like nature. You are alive, you are moving, you are vibrant. And vividness comes from doing. So it's very beautiful. Adjects may thus be held by several subjects in common when this is convenient, but it is necessary to follow the divisions among subjects so that each of them pertain to one subject and not be included among those that pertain to another. They should avoid all continuity, connection, crowding, and admixture. When the adjects of diverse subjects are permitted, actions and changes here and there, it is as though they were in someone else's hands and busy with other business, so that you call them to your assistance in vain. All right, so Rao had asked, what is organons? And here we go. There remains to be discussed the organon, which, according to our proposition, is something that the soul can use. Without taking action, it is sufficient for the organon to have a complete understanding of the forms that are to be induced, and to grasp the reasons according to which the subjects are formed. For it is indeed true in this work that where opportunity permits, that which is produced by acting on the forms of the subjects, which is the basis for the value of the work, is not to be omitted insofar as it is essential. Again, we must consider of what kind the organon ought to be, and in what way it ought to be put to use. Now, we want to really focus on this here. Without taking action, we need to take action. 9 things unite to further memorization and recollection. Intention, which is from some sense perception, which may be extrinsic or intrinsic among those that are moved by the objects. Provocation of the imagination, where a movement of the senses either directly or indirectly awakens the imagination. Passive movement of the imagination, by which it is driven to investigate. active movement of the imagination, by which it then investigates, scrutiny, by which the imagination investigates according to the intention, image, inasmuch as this produces a memorable species, intention of the image, which is the reason by which the thing to be remembered is made present, while other things are excluded, presentation of the intention, by which the intention is made present, and judgment, by which the intention of the image is apprehended. Among all these, that which we call scrutiny or discernment, inasmuch by it thought inquires and discerns, may easily be determined to be assigned as an instrument to reason, because we call it by this latter name commonly, right up to our own time. However, it has not received proper consideration, and it lacks a proper and popular name. This lack of a rational name and consideration is a barrier in the way of invention, because the foundation upon which reminiscence and memory are formed is hidden away in the profound blindness of dense darkness. It is therefore this instrument in the faculty of cognition, similar to a stick in our hand, which you are able to grasp by giving it a name, or better still, a reason by which the name should be given, by which what is thrown together in a heap may by us be divided, broken up, and dispersed, just as a selected chestnut may be taken from the midst of acorns, or from among its fellow chestnuts. That's very important. This instrument may be known through its action. It has a double virtue, that is of conservation and remembrance, which, as they say, are one thing, distinguished according to reason, and both of these from imagination as I see it. The virtue of conservation is found at the limits of the memorative and imaginative virtues, as though it was their neighbor. Remembrance may be distinguished from imagination, since by it the intention of an imaginable form may be comprehended even when the imaginable form is not present, and thereby the form is not deprived of its intention. It happens thus that we may retain many things at once, even if we cannot imagine them all. Herein it acts as an instrument to discern, separate, and order. If it is permissible to speak more exactly, it is that by which discretion, separation, and ordering are done. So this is the idea of the wheels and using the wheels to help you with discernment, basically. You've got a problem in life. You have some memorized stuff that deals with the worldly problems, the worldhood of the world as such, as the great No Means No once called it. And then you have this other wheel that has your spiritual responses to all of this, and that helps you have discernment, right? Very, very beautiful. And in this way, it is set apart from cogitation in that it provides a consideration of many things as one, that is, one imagined thing or an image of one retained out of many drawn out into a proposition. And it is said to comprehend the imaginative as though it were a picture painted on a wall, and remembrance of that picture retains the intention, so that this organon by turns departs and approaches, or more properly makes a report, and applies the one to the other. And if these are linked to one another, they enter into an embrace like the links of a chain or the equivalent. Therefore, as nature herself brought this connection down to our own times, art emulated her by the order of places where it was not possible to connect one thing to another. They were ordered one after another, but not properly, I say, nor according to reason, but appropriated simply on account of their present position, and by this connection, as though by the application of extraneous images, was to be brought to remembrance. Thus, the office of scrutiny is that unities, by which I mean many individual things, I concede this much to be the correctors of words, are taken according to some symbolism, and by these disposed in order. While 100 eggs taken one at a time and assigned diverse numbers, as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on, successively would be completely useless, and would soon form groups, and occurring in a confused manner would reach the point that they would interfere with one another, someone could move eggs out of one heap and into another with a stick, taking some and leaving others, so that one by one he brings them into order. Thus cogitation, quickly distinguishing itself from the other powers of the mind, determinately chooses one after another by this virtue of scrutiny. So what is he talking about? Identifying the gender of the egg by looking at it? No. He's talking about being able to basically have an answer, because when you are able to bring these wheels together, they properly make a report, because one wheel applies to the other, as he's saying here. Makes a report, and one applies to the other, and so forth. So this is creating this luminous detail. And, you're not getting confused about the diversity of things and the lack of oneness, but you're dissolving all of this by giving yourself the answer that you need in that particular moment. So here is a locus, and let's look at the footnote. A locus, place, or topic in the jargon of Renaissance rhetoric was a theme for reflection that was used for the purpose of rhetorical invention. Bruno is offering his metaphor of eggs for this purpose. Here is a locus for consideration by similitude, how in the same way as in a crowd the eggs receive from the memory of numerical order an order that they would not otherwise have. So in some sense we're doing like early information theory here. What are the possibilities? What are the, what am I looking for, the word? There's a word for this. It's a computational thing where we're trying to run through possible combinations. And so it'll come to me in a second. Thus we may easily find the genus of arts by which things we have heard or seen. Exponential, that's what I'm looking for. So it's like a kind of a means of creating an exponential ability to receive wisdom on demand, because we're able to actually know what exponential thinking is, and basically run the numbers, so to speak, and have actual answers that correspond to knowledge that might actually help us complete real goals that matter. So thus we may easily find the genus of arts by which things we have heard or seen, forming numbers congruent to the same genus, being themselves ordered by number, we conceive the order of things perceived by the senses accordingly, since, knowing how to number things, we learn to remember very easily. This method of forming numbers for all things is one of the ways our method stands out among all others. The theory thereof is in the book, The Great Key, for $49.99, where semi-mathematical numbers are discussed. Now, remember, if you're practicing this, I do believe you have The Great Key. So, I believe I have displayed enough of this to inventive minds in this place, where, if we have not hinted enough, we have at least said enough to provide a clear congruence of places. This has been considered by us in respect of the few, that they may have an advantage, but not for all. So, remember earlier I said, and not only do I think that he's maybe saying the Great Key is already with you if you're practicing, but he's kind of, trying to wake the reader up to, you've got what you need, get started, get going, make it so. There is no great key coming. None. Never was, never will be. You are the key insofar as you are taking action. There are thus a certain number of scrutinies by which cogitation comes into contact in its own way with the species it conserves, having in itself the ability of dividing, separating, collecting, applying, preserving, forming, ordering, and bringing together into a chosen unity. Scrutinies are said to be numerous because there is no convenient genus into which they can all be gathered together. Further, the number is such that there is none other by which the same memorability can be implanted or obtained, notwithstanding that we would not perceive it by means of any other figure, nor by the same, defined according to any agreement of the sort that in memorizing is necessarily concurrent with the principle. Such places having power not in that they are places, nor because they are imagined, but because they contain latent number in them on account of their order, concerning which latent number in them on account of their order, concerning which we explain two different reasons, of which each draws to itself the next closest genus, and the other draws another, so that we may by this agreement have the best results. Numbers are most clearly denominated according to their ordinal position, and thus differ from numbers denominated by their cardinal value. Let's look at the note. I have had to paraphrase here, for Bruno uses two Latin terms, quotitias and quotias, or quotitas, that have no exact English translation. The point at issue, however, is the difference between ordinal numbers and cardinal numbers. The former, Bruno suggests, are easier to remember. So, one way to think about this is if you have your wheel, why wouldn't you know that A is 1, 2, B is 2, C is 3, etc.? This can help in terms of, navigating it later if you, for some reason, needed to navigate it in that particular way. So it is to the latter that we refer when we ask how many eggs are there, to those denominated by their ordinal position. But by the way, this image of the egg is probably well chosen. Eggs have many symbolic meanings. Certainly they have a kind of phoenix feeling in terms of, whatever is broken, the fire that burns the thing comes to new life, etc. There's many things to think about with eggs. Eggs as being something like the shape of an ellipsis around a planet, on and on and on. With them, we could as do as well by asking which number is this egg, which number is that one, and it would be said to be different according to ordinal number. A question about number can be taken in either way, for if someone responds by saying first, second, or third, then the first, second, or third occurs, or can be made to occur in order. This, where am I here? I got lost here. This belongs to the practice rather than the theory of ordinal numbers, which consists not in logic but in use. For indeed, use appears twice, that is, first with respect to a particular person and a particular determinate habit, as things happen to be recorded by ingenuity, reason, and intelligence, whence the person knows that this is to be said, this is to be brought forth, this is to follow thereafter, and after it something else in rational order. In this, properly speaking, reminiscence is said to take place, and thus and differs thus from memory according to a famous distinction. Second, with respect to persons, but rather with something that may be said to be a more absolute reason, though granted it is not truly absolute, which happens to us when we are able to remember something that is not at all intellectual, such as this passage concerning Charon, according to Merlin. Parts of the land are shaken wholly into ruin, or others of the same kind, in which there cannot be a cogitative act, nor any act of distinct virtue, by which memory is able to exist. Still, it is manifestly true of reminiscence, however, that there is some manifest difference between one and another. When this application is not referred to the memory of that which it is to receive and retain, as we have said and will prove by demonstration in the doctrine of the great key, nor to what is generally called fantasy, inasmuch as it includes in its connotation what is commonly described as common sense, which is none other than that which stands before the particular and external senses in the mode appropriate to them, either in whole or in part, nor certainly is it of the cogitative virtue, which is of the apprehending cognitive faculties, among those which belong alongside examples of perceivable and knowable things. What then is that inner power by which those sounds that are perceived by the ear and reported to the common sense, as sounds wholly naked, are able to enter into memory? If it is cogitative, certainly, though it is hardly permissible to define another internal power equal with the cogitative power of memory and inserting itself next thereto, it is by no means only cogitative, but equipped with scrutiny, by which not only those things that can be touched by the hands, but also those to which the hand is, as it were, unable to extend, are admitted among those things that prompt the memory. Among these, certainly, this instrument must necessarily belong, and the aspects of it that are not obvious stand in way of many discoveries. All right, so I think we've covered a lot for today. There is much more to do, but the thing to do now is to thank you all. Thanks especially for Renee for your support ongoing, and also for letting us know about your competition participation. Congratulations on that. I am so grateful to Miskatonic Books for allowing us to do this, and I want to repeat this announcement about Braden Adams, 28th of August, I believe. He is memorizing 70 decks of cards for Alzheimer's research and funding to help people who go out in the community to help people with Alzheimer's. You can submit your contribution to what he's doing at magneticmemorymethod.com/BC Alts, which is BC Alzheimer's Society, where I'm actually from in British Columbia, in Canada. And so, if you want to do a good thing, do that. But above all, please make sure that you get a copy of this. You can get it on Amazon. I'm very grateful to Miskatonic Books, and I'm very grateful also to John Michael Greer of ecosophia.net. This is a lot of hard work to publish books, to put them together, and for them to allow us to study it in this way is wonderful, and I'm very grateful. So Miskatonic Books is miskatonicbooks.com. I'm going to go back to that slide there, miskatonicbooks.com. Please grab a copy. This is very kind of them to do this, and it will serve you very well. We've only been able to touch on a very small part of the book. It is a beautiful thing to read, and I really appreciate everybody who joined us today. If you watched the replay, thank you kindly. I hope you'll leave some comments below. Follow all those links, and again, thank you very much to John Michael Greer, to Miskatonic Books. Thanks to the other people who work on Bruno, Scott Gosnell and Martin Fox. They are incredible inspirations and great resources to follow up on. But above all, make sure to thank Miskatonic Books and John Michael Greer for allowing us to work with this. And I will see you again. If I hear loud and clear that you want to see this more, there are ways to contact me. The best way is to leave a comment on the replay rather than the chat, to say, yes, we would like to have another session on this. There's so much that we could do with Bruno, and I just want to know that it's wanted. And again, Scott Gosnell has also given the PDF so we could look through on the composition of the images. There's so much work to be done, and I hope to do it. And I may not wait for your response and just hop on and do it. But the point is, if we were going to sum all this up, I don't think anybody really knows much about reality or any of this sort of thing. And yet, we are cursed to want to. And yet that curse is also a blessing, right? And so we have this thing called memory, and it is truly the most astonishing thing. When we think of other species, animals, and so forth, they operate as they do, and we don't know that much about how their memory operates, but we know a lot about how our memory operates. We also know how it doesn't operate, but we're able to get into it. We're able to massage it. We're able to take action and have every scientific verification that it works. We have not only thousands of years of tradition, Bruno commentating like crazy on the ancient Greek tradition, for example. Me commentating now on Bruno's comments on the ancient tradition and so forth. We have endless commentary. We have so many books. We now have emerging in the last couple of years the most beautiful information about the Aboriginal tradition, for example, and other prehistoric and ancient ways of doing this. There's a commonality in humanity of doing this. We have 30 years of memory competitions and the records that have been produced, the records that have been broken. We have all the evidence that you could ever want that this stuff works. But as ye old brother Bruno says again and again and again and again in this text, action. So I will leave you with that, my friends. Thank you so much, and until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.